My guest today and a few other guests before him have spoken highly of a book by John Berger called Ways of Seeing. And if I may borrow that title, that's exactly what I've expanded through the many conversations I've had on the show. Ways of Seeing. I've learned new ways of looking at my country, my society, my culture, our times, our cities, and I've also learned to look at myself differently. Many listeners, I'm quite sure, would say that the first episode I recorded with Amitava Kumar, episode 265, did exactly that for them. That's an episode I know means a lot to many of my writing students and to many of my listeners in general. Among other things, it taught us the importance of journaling and how by journaling, one can not just learn more about the world but also about oneself. We can shape ourselves through our writing. Well, when we last recorded, Amitava had just come out with the blue book, which I love and keep gifting to people. And now he's come out with the yellow book. So, of course, I took the chance to call him on the show again. Ways of Talking.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Verma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest today is Amitava Kumar. This is our second episode. You must listen to the first, and you must also listen to this because Amitava is awesome. Bas, aur kya bole. I will warn you though that Amitava inflicted immense cruelty on all of you during this conversation. He insisted on spending half of it asking me questions, and because he's a friend, I couldn't refuse. Personally, I think that's half an episode wasted because I think you'd all agree that we could just listen to Amitava forever. But the first half is all him. It's great. Maza aa gaya, and then right towards the end, I get him to recite some of his poetry in both Hindi and English. So do listen, but first, let's take a quick break. Hey, the music started and this sounds like a commercial, but it isn't. It's a plea from me to check out my latest labor of love, a YouTube show I am co-hosting with my good friend, the brilliant Ajay Shah. We've called it Everything is Everything. Every week, we'll speak for about an hour on things we care about, from the profound to the profane, from the exalted to the everyday. We range widely across subjects and we bring multiple frames with which we try to understand the world. Please join us on our journey and please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Amit Verma, AMITVARMA. The show is called Everything is Everything. Please do check it out. Amitava, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
All right. Great to see you. Great to talk to you again, boss.
Yeah, I should actually be saying welcome back because it's been a couple of years since we last recorded, and that was such a delightful episode, a big favorite of my writing students as well, who kind of keep talking about it.
Well, I have to tell you, whether you believe it or not, I have not gone to a single literary festival or done any reading without at least one person coming up and saying, I heard you on Amit Verma's Seen and Unseen. So, please send me your address so that I can start sending you royalty, money, etc. Every month. As I said to you once, a friend of mine proposed that I should buy you a flat in Bombay.
A flat in Bombay will be more welcome than an author's humble royalty money. But ये हमारे जासूस हर तरह फैले हुए हैं. As we were setting this recording up yesterday, you told me, rather alarmingly for me, that it has snowed really heavily and the snow is on all the power lines, and inshallah we will be able to record, and indeed, thank goodness we are. But when you mentioned snow, I was reminded of this incident that happened in this recent web series I was watching, which is the British version of Wallander, which is of course based on Henning Mankel's great books with Carl Wallander, and the British version stars Kenneth Branagh, and it's brilliant. Branagh is just remarkable in it, one of the great acting performances ever all through the series. In the particular episode, which is based on the White Lioness, our lead character is in South Africa, and there is a young man there who is soon going to die, and you kind of know that this guy is going to die. He's been caught up in a crime, almost a victim as it were, and at one point he is imploring Wallander that, take me back to Sweden with you. I want to come back to Sweden with you. I have heard that there is snow there. I have never seen snow. I want to see snow. And I just thought that that was so beautiful and moving for me, even though it was almost kind of sort of matter of fact. And then when you mentioned snow, I said ki yeah, coming to think of it, Amitava would not have seen snow till he was an adult perhaps. So
That's exactly
I want to
right.
ask you about snow. And also in your beautiful book, The Yellow Book, there is a section at the end. I found the section at the end about your father very moving. And at one point, you mentioned that he had told you that the first time in his life that he saw a light bulb was when he was 8 or 10 years old. And again, I think that all of this we take for granted. That he may take, you may take electricity for granted. You today may take snow for granted, but the first time it happens, there must be this sense of wonder and this joy and all of that. So I want to ask you not
Yes.
just about snow, but about that sense of
Yes.
wonder. And, does it go away? Do you bring it back? Does it require intentionality to continue to notice things with that sort of freshness?
Absolutely. All right. Let me begin. Because you welcome all kinds of. I'll read to you a small poem whose title is Barf Girne Se Pehle. But I'll first read the English version, which is what I wrote second. I first wrote it in Hindi and then I translated it into English. Before the storm. This morning, my wife said to me that the Central Hudson Electric Company, without telling us, had cut down 3 trees in our backyard. I was writing an essay about an artist who had seen, as a child, her mother cutting out her own face from all the family photographs. I looked out of the window and then at my wife. How easy would living become if it was easy to say anything? अब आप हिंदी,
Beautiful.
any listeners who do not have Hindi, please forgive us, but this is the Hindi version which I wrote first. बर्फ गिरने से पहले आज सुबह पत्नी ने कहा कि सेंट्रल हडसन बिजली कंपनी ने बिना बताए 3 पेड़ काट दिए हमारे घर के पिछवाड़े में। एक लेख लिख रहा था मैं एक कलाकार के बारे में जिसने बचपन में देखा था अपनी मां को अपना ही चेहरा काटते हुए परिवार के सारे फोटो से। झांक के बाहर देखा खिड़की के और फिर अपनी पत्नी को। जीना कितना सरल हो जाता, कुछ कहना हो जाता इतना ही आसान। So, just a little, because you talked about snow, I thought it's all about, in some ways, about talking, about remembering, about trying to sometimes not remember, the violence of memory often, and then trying to create some beauty out of it, some art out of it. The artist in question was an artist from Bombay, and I wrote about her in a Percha. Talking of snow, there is a wonderful essay in Granta by the Polish writer Richard Kapuczynski. He is in Ghana, and at night, because his tire has had repeated punctures, they have stopped in a village. There is no electricity. In the light of the fire, what the people want to know is, what is snow? Okay? And he talks about it. He tells, and then they want to know other things about colonies and whiteness. But when he is trying to get to sleep in the night, he has this lovely line, paragraph. Suddenly I felt shame, some sort of shortcoming, a sense of having missed the mark. What I had described was not my country. Now, snow and the lack of colonies, that's accurate at least. But it is nothing of what we know, of what we carry around within ourselves without even wondering about. Nothing of our pride and despair, of our life, nothing of what we breathe, of our death. यानी कि आपसे कोई पूछे, मुझसे कोई पूछे, what is snow? और मैं जवाब दूं, let's say in my village in Champaran. Or alternatively, I come here and someone says, यार हर की पौड़ी, what do Hindus do beside the Ganges? और मैं जो explain करूं, will I have said much? I would have said something. But would I have caught the wonder? and the shame of something, that is what this writer is getting at. And what I want to say to you then is कि मुझे कैपुचिंस्की की तरह हमेशा लगता है कि यार मैं क्या कह रहा हूं, जैसे I have a line somewhere in passport photos where a distant cousin of mine in my village asks, tell me about your life there. He's asking about America. And I say, unable to say anything, I say, अभी या दिन बनो या तो अभी रात बा माने कि right now it is 3 a.m. in 3 p.m. in the day here, but there it is night. And he said, oh my God, तो अलग दुनिया बता. I mean, for him it was an idea that it is something entirely far away. Well, I have a novel coming out in February here and in May in India. And my protagonist has come to Berkeley on a Fulbright. He's from a village in India, just like my father was. And one of his students at Berkeley shows him a photograph from Kumbh Mela of a priest pulling a car with a rope tied to his penis. And the guy, you might have seen some of these photos which appear not necessarily of priests pulling, a sadhu, naga, but you have seen various feats being performed there. The student with a smirk says, "Hey, professor, is this true?" And the professor thinks to himself, isn't it even stranger, though, that I, who did not see an electric bulb till I was 8, and I had to go out into the fields to shit, isn't it an even greater wonder that this cheeky boy and I are meeting here in Berkeley, where Jayaprakash Narayan had come as a young man, or where Sikhs came 100 years ago and were persecuted? Isn't it more strange if we think of all the things, this encounter, than the simple fact of some priest pulling a car with his penis? So wahi, let me end my long lecture on wonder right there.
No, that's a delightful lecture with its delightful allusions and digressions. But what was it like the first time you saw snow? Or the first time you flew a plane,
Yes, both things I'll tell you. I remember I was a graduate student. I had newly arrived in the country. Maybe 2-3 months had passed. I had discovered things like yogurt in a plastic bowl that you could buy and that had fruit at the bottom. It filled me with excitement, these small things. I had been taken to an apple orchard by a woman I liked in my class. But there was another classmate of mine, and this also was a woman, and I was walking beside her when the flurries started coming down. And it seemed like a scene from, I felt I was already inhabiting a movie I had seen or something. And I began to slowly whirl around her, and I stuck my tongue out so that I could catch it on my tongue. So wo snow ki baat hai. First time I flew on the plane was to come to this country as a graduate student. I had never flown before in my life. And they offloaded me and sent me to Bombay. They had given too many. There were too many passengers that they had given seats to. And so I kept saying to people who seemed to be in a hurry, yes, please go ahead. And then I was left behind. And they sent me to Bombay. And when they put me on the plane, because they had delayed my flight and sent me for another day and all that, they put me in business class. And the woman came down, and I thought, I was very nervous. And the woman, the flight attendant said, what would you like to drink? I had never drunk champagne before. I said, champagne, please. But my manners or what I was doing or how I was clueless must have given me away, because the Frenchman, an old, elegant man next to me, he said, how come you're traveling in business class? So, so that was my first experience.
How was the champagne?
I liked it. I liked it very much. The taste has never gone away.
When was the last time something new happened to you, like your first time with snow or your first time flying?
यार वो तो हर बार होता है, in the sense that Last night, I was listening to you talking to Ram Guha and then Danish Hussain on your podcast, and I was shoveling snow outside because the snow was falling. A foot and a half of snow had fallen, and I was expecting a guest. That was the first time. You know what I'm saying? But I'm thinking you are asking slightly different question. Well, this summer I went I went on a trip in India, visiting towns along the length of the Ganga. What had happened was that in March, my father died, and so I had felt that during the rituals, I had followed them, but they seemed a little distant. So I thought, okay, let me return to that site. But instead of just going to Varanasi where we had cremated him, I thought, let me start from the place where it becomes Ganga. So that is Dev Prayag in Uttarakhand. So I went there, Haridwar, Delhi to Haridwar, Haridwar to Dev Prayag, and then I went down. So being in places like Joshimath or Oli, and then coming down to the plains, to Allahabad, for example, where I stayed with a former student's family, and then Banaras. All of that was new, you know. So there was a sense of discovery. I made drawings and I took notes, and hopefully from what I wrote, I'll do. I started a Substack. That was new about that journey, and so all of that. Am I getting to what you were asking?
Yeah, no, absolutely you are. So there is, in our last episode, we had spoken about that moving passage from Rahi Mazum Raza's Adha Gaon, where, he talks about this character talks about, how, quote, on the battlefield when death came very near, I certainly remembered Allah, but instead of Mecca or Karbala, I remembered Gangali. And I have quoted this to many of my guests in future episodes and asked them all the same question: where is your Gangali? And I've got interesting answers from everyone, but there is one in particular that I remember from Max Rodenbeck, who was editor of The Economist in India, and he had grown up in Cairo. And he said, my Gangali is Cairo, but it is not the Cairo of today. It is the Cairo of my childhood, and that Cairo no longer exists.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned your dad, and there is this beautiful passage in the Yellow Book where you write, quote, when my father was gone, a large part of my past would disappear, like one of those videos you see of landslides, an entire cliff with a winding road and cars disappearing into the swirling river. It wasn't land or property that I was thinking about. I was thinking about my parents, my mother who had come to this village as a young bride, and my father who had brought me today to the place where he had been born. It was a people who had made my past, who would soon be gone. And I want to ask you today, to come a full circle and ask you about your Gangali, because I feel that this passage sort of, adds a layer to it, that perhaps when you lose your parents, and I think I felt it very strongly as well, that you lose that sense of home a little bit, because it is so much embedded in your past and in the people who have inhabited those times with you.
Yeah. By the way, I'm very glad you asked that question. In many ways, in your podcast, you ask your guests to return to their origins, to where things started, and I have also been intrigued by their responses. How, for example, Ram Guha, talking about what I was listening to last night, Ram Guha says his Gangali is, Dehradun and the forest that drew him back to his first work. And then Danish complicated it by saying, by saying something which, Danish is a friend of mine and I respect him. I totally disagreed with his response, because he said, when he was best poised to answer that question, he should have said to you, Gangali is my Gangali, because his village is just a little distance away. And if I'm not mistaken, Rahi Masum Raza is also a relative of his. In any case, and Danish represents none of your other guests are as close to that Gangali as Danish was. But that is the point. Even what is in front of you, you sometimes do not recognize. Kyare? 20 साल पहले मैं क्यों नहीं जानता था कि मेरी शादी सुजाता से होगी. अब आज बुढ़ापे में हम उस साथ हैं. अच्छा, in all these digressions, I had forgotten what you were asking. Okay, I had a feeling. I'm still, even as I was, when I told you on our last episode, ki, when my parents took me to our village when I was a child, I would try to draw images or what I saw on the Ganga, for example. It looked very beautiful to me. Or when I reached the village, I would think, these fields, I should be able to draw them. They're so beautiful. And it never worked for me. And इस बार जब मैं गया, maybe it was December or January, when I went with my father, he was still alive. I was drawing it. I thought, I was drawing it. I was thinking, I felt I was approaching a reality I recognized. And at the same time, I was so conscious that he would die soon. And that's what happened 3 months later. So at the very moment where I felt most closest to the village, I was also very conscious of how close I was to losing it, to losing my most vital connection to it, which was, of course, my father. So that is the real point I want to say to you, that it's not that you slowly lose a connection, but maybe it is at the point where when you feel that you finally have some intimacy, that something then breaks away, and now it's gone. I really don't think I will have that connection anymore.
I think about how sometimes our relationship to things which seem very real and very solid and will last longer than us is actually really frail and hangs by a thread. Like, I was discussing with a friend a while back about cities and the cities that we have lived in. And I thought that, okay, I have been in Bombay since 1995, but how much of the city have I really inhabited, in the sense that my city is really, I spend a lot of time in my room. I might go out for a walk sometimes, I might go to a cafe, I might meet a friend, and that tiny sliver, that superficial little layer of life that I carry with me and which is around me is my city and nothing else is, and I don't really know the city at all, and I am not really off here, and nobody is really off here in that sense. Everybody's in this individual kind of imagined city that they carry with them, that they can superimpose on the real one, and it kind of seems to fit, but it seems to fit until it doesn't. And what you said about your sort of father's village and losing that connection when you lost him also brought alive to me the frailness of these sort of connections. That, do you have a connection to that place anymore outside of memory? And do I really have a connection to this place that is any deeper than to someone who may never have lived here? What are your thoughts?
चलिए, इसी बात पर एक छोटी सी कविता फिर से हो जाए. Another poem.
Please.
This poem is called Cold Spring. Now, when I take the train from here to New York, I pass a place called Cold Spring. So, पहले I will read in Hindi. Cold Spring. Cold Spring एक रेलवे स्टेशन का नाम है. हालांकि वह एक कोल्ड ड्रिंक का भी नाम हो सकता है. हाँ, सादा. शायद उसके विज्ञापन में आती विद्या बालन आलिया भट्ट नहीं, आलिया के प्रिय ड्रिंक का नाम होगा चिल. मेरी ट्रेन जब रुकती है कोल्ड स्प्रिंग में 2 मिनटों के लिए, बाहर झांक कर देखता हूं हमेशा कि मेरी दोस्त किरण प्लेटफॉर्म पर खड़ी तो नहीं. सैकड़ों बार गुजरा हूं वहां से, सिर्फ एक बार मिली थी किरण, लेकिन अब वह किरण का स्टेशन हो गया है. मान लो स्टेशन का नाम बदल गया हो. एक छोटा शहर हडसन नदी के किनारे, किरण, जहां आप चाय भी पी सकते हैं सर्दी के दिनों में. अब now let the English translation. Thank you. This Kiran, by the way, is Kiran Desai. Her mother, Anita Desai, has a home there, and they live there. Cold Spring. Cold Spring is the name of a train station, even though it could also be the name of a cold drink, a plain drink. Maybe Vidya Balan would appear in its ad, but not Alia Bhatt. Alia's drink of choice would be called Chill. My train stops at Cold Spring for 2 minutes, and I glance outside each time to see if my friend Kiran is standing on the platform. I've passed that place hundreds of times. Only once did I find Kiran. But that station is now hers. Imagine, the station's name has changed to Kiran, a small town on the Hudson River, a place to get a cup of tea on cold days. What's my relationship to Tumhara? So your question was, thank you. Your question was, what is my relationship to? I think, यार मैं तो एक कोर्स पढ़ाता हूँ यहाँ पे called Writing About Cities. ठीक है? तो आप शायद जानना चाहेंगे कि what books I teach or something. So let me do a quick exegesis there, which is the last time I taught it, it started with at Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept by Elizabeth Smart. I certainly had my friend Teju Cole's Open City in it, Katie Kitamura's Intimacies, a book about Harlem, various pieces by all kinds of people. Hanif Qureshi Goes to Bradford, little section by Salman Rushdie on London, V.R. Naipaul writing about coming to Earl's Court as a new migrant, Bagara Bagara. So, for me, or Suketu Mehta's wonderful piece about Bombay, which had first been published in Granta and then made it into Maximum City. So or Sam Selvon's Lonely Londoner Sky extract, where these early migrants, working class migrants from the West Indies, describe Charing Cross and other places. Acha. So my relationship to place now is an evocation in literature of various places, and my thinking how other cities or other towns live within these larger places, right? If someone steps into the polluted Yamuna holding a little straw, उसको soup कहते हैं हिंदी में, और उस soup पर, if you know, there will be a coconut and a banana and a little diya burning, etc., in the cold chill of November, and she offers it to the sun during Chhath Puja. That is a little bit of a village from Bihar still living in Delhi. So, and that is the thing that is catches me always. A small rough field in this town that I live in, Poughkeepsie, where West Indian cricketers play cricket. You know, so that is my idea of the city. These other histories, other pasts, other places surviving in what is a larger place. I thought we should just take a pause for a second to to tell your listeners that you have always asked questions of your interviewees, and before they get all bored out of their minds listening to me, I should tell them that it is certainly my plan today to ask you questions, and we will make discoveries. We will make discoveries that will be new to them, and we will, and so that should be what we keep as a hook for people to keep listening.
You are right that you're not warning my listeners, you're warning me. So, yeah, I'm absolutely kind of terrified.
No, all good.
So, here's my next question. In your extremely moving section about your father in your book, you also speak about your own worries that when you forget a name or you forget something, you wonder, shit, am I getting dementia? Am I getting Alzheimer's?
Mm-hmm.
And, my father, of course, went through that through his last years.
Yes, I remember.
In your father's case also, you speak about how somebody who was always so crisp in his memory in terms of numbers and events and all that was getting confused about, birth dates of family and so on and so forth and all of that. And I have really two questions questions here, and the first of those is sort of a question about memory, because, and I think this subject, kind of this question, first came up in an episode I did with Luke Burgess, whose father went through a similar thing where he just forgot everything by the end of it. And then I wonder, what is a self? Like everything that is core to my sense of self is contingent on my memory. And I feel that if the memory vanishes and the person vanishes, then what is left is really an accident of nature and some nurture. You're then flesh and bones. You're kind of an animal in a sense, which is sort of a very bleak outlook. But I kind of, sometimes I will also forget things. I'll, get very absent-minded, and the same thought will come to my head that, and this actually ties into the second question, so I'll ask it anyway, which is a question about the passing of time. You're 60 now. When one is young, time stretches out ahead of you. It seems that somebody who is 40 is like an old man, and so on and so forth. And was there a period of time where you had to recalibrate this in your own head, where you had to come to terms with growing older, maybe not being able to do all the things you wanted to do in your life, impending mortality, and of course, every time you forget something, it becomes a reminder of this.
Yeah. What is the self? Yeah. I always think that I'm very alert to paradoxes or contradictions. And so I'm alive to the simple point that those people who record how their memory is being lost, and some have done this, are perhaps most alive to memories, because they cherish them so much, so what I'm saying is, the self that remembers is indeed an important self, but so is the self that feels the self slipping away and tries desperately to record something or to preserve something, and therefore I cherish very much stories. There is a story by Alice Munro called The Bear Came Over the Mountain, which
That's my favorite short story of all time.
Yeah, oh, mine
my
too.
God.
That's very, very good. Very good, very good. We are on the same page then. All the twists and turns of what happens as you're losing memory. And in the story, as you'll remember, someone who has lost her memory also finds love for a while because they have forgotten. They have erased the past love, and now two people who have lost their memory discover love in each other, and then something else happens, and then another memory clicks into place. It's amazing. So I'm very alert to the shifting sands of time. You also asked me, apart from that vanishing self, there was a second part. Damn.
About time.
Yes,
about
about
coming
time.
to terms with the passing of time.
Yes. Well, as you will have noticed, and you had talked about it last time also, and maybe because you had double-clicked on it, I titled a chapter, the opening chapter here, "How to Stop Time." I think journaling is a way to stop time. To do art is to stop time. And what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is not to preserve time in an amber, but simply to prevent it being all a blur, Okay. So, for example, my rules here: how to stop time. You must keep a journal. 2, don't just keep a daily journal. Make marks in your journal all the time. Return to what you once enjoyed. 4, be alert to the passing seasons. Time cannot be stopped, of course, but it can be lived more fully. And by which I mean, I love drawing the spring when today I'll try to draw the snow maybe, but when spring comes, I love drawing the cherry blossoms on my street. And all of these are suggestions on what we must do, even when it's a time of crisis. There is a great line which I hope I can find, about which I have offered here. Yes, here it is, from Maxine Hong Kingston. It's in Rule 5 in How to Stop Time. She says, in a time of destruction, create something. A poem, a parade, a community, a school, a vow, a moral principle, one peaceful moment. I've been asked by friends to say something or to provide a statement on a particular forum uh, appealing for peace in Gaza. And I have not done so far, not because I'm not utterly committed to the idea of peace, I am, but I did not know what I would say that would be different from what so many others had said. So, yesterday was the first time that I did my first painting for that, for the issue of peace. I mention this because I want to say that following Maxine Hong Kingston's dictum, I want in a time of destruction to create something, to stop time, to mark time. But it cannot be just anything also, that it should come from some valued introspection and to think about what indeed only I can say. So wahi koshish hai bhaiya, of being an artist. So I'm doing a series. It's called An Olive Branch.
You quote Virginia Woolf in The Yellow Book, where she writes, I must try to set aside half an hour in some part of my day and consecrate it to diary writing, give it a name and a place, and then perhaps, such is a human mind, I shall come to think of it as a duty and disregard other duties for it. And in our last episode, of course, we'd spoken, and I know that this was influential for many of my writing students. We'd spoken about how journaling can shape the self, how it's not just about recording the world, but you're creating yourself in a sense by writing every day. The you that writes every day for 5 years will be a different you from the you that doesn't. So, it has that kind of an impact. Now, you've written more about journaling in the Yellow Book, where, for example, you speak about how you have separate journals. It's not just one journal. So one journal is just for free writing in the morning, 10-15 minutes. Another journal could be for the writing project you're working on. There is a file on your computer where you record the day's main events, which you do at night. And the most important, you say, is a daily planner where you note down how time is passing. Like you say, quote, I often write down how a particular half hour was spent. More often, what I mark is an hour or a longer chunk of time, a long line, crossing out 3 hours or more if I have been teaching, stop quote. Give me a picture of your day through this particular kind of journal, and I have many questions about journaling. I'll double click on different aspects of it, as it were. First of all, I'm intrigued by this habit of in yesterday, or perhaps today. I mean, today hasn't really unfolded fully for you, it's your morning, but yesterday, for example, how many chunks were there? What did the diary look like? And how does it change the way you think about your day? Does it then change your behavior, where you are in a sense being accountable to yourself for what you do with your time? Not necessarily working hard, but even leisure can be a part of this.
Yes. I cannot stress enough for you and also for your listeners how much my life has changed after I started doing a more detailed journaling. By more detailed journaling means कि ये नहीं कि भाई at night I wrote went to Kalgaon, Mamaji took me on a boat. When we got off, I ate mutton and rice. Returned, Ma was singing a song. Everything else was okay. Not that. Instead, 9 a.m. this or 9:30 had coffee. 10, 11, listened to music and wrote through 50 words. जैसे कि, so that planner is a much more bulky thing which I could not take to India when I went for my father's funeral, but otherwise it was a very faithful account. This year, I'm going, every week I have to travel between my town and New York City where I have a fellowship. But just for this year, I bought a slightly thinner so that I can record, not necessarily, I know, every half hour, but just. So yesterday, for example, I've been trying I've been trying to do some yoga. So it records that I did yoga. It records that I made breakfast for my son and for my wife. And then I went out to get samosas from the Indian store. I started priming canvases, which means that you work on the canvas to just put some color on it in order to make it more receptive to the more brighter or heavier colors. And then it says that I was preparing for seen and unseen. And I did that by reading a book, which you will hear about later, where I thought,
Wow.
this gets to the heart, I think, of what Amit has done or has succeeded in doing. And then it also records that I made 2 watercolors for the Olive Branch series. Cool. But the 2 things that have changed much more dramatically since the last time we talked is that one is, it is all, and both those things have followed in some ways from the book I read around that time called Artist's Life. Is it called Artist's Life? Julia Cameron. Okay. And there she suggests that what we should do is do the morning pages, which is what you talked about when you said free writing. And that allows you just sit down and write, my little change or variation on it is that I also do a drawing when I write in the morning, just a quick sketch, whatever I can see outside the window or in front of me. It could be the banana I have peeled or my coffee cup, or it can be the tree outside loaded with snow, which is what I did this morning. Now, the morning pages allows you to just free yourself because you're putting down not just, you're not only allowing yourself to write in an uncensored way, what you're really doing is also you're expressing everything that has been a little bit repressed or has been engaging your subconscious. So it just comes out, some things do. Your anxieties, your dreams. And the other thing is that she talks about having an artist's date every week, and so that is something I do, which is how to carve out time to do something nice for yourself, which feeds your creativity. एक डॉक्यूमेंट्री देख ली या फिर एक म्यूजियम चला गया, एक वॉक के लिए ही गया, anything. Now, so what I was saying was that it is not just the morning pages, or for that matter, the artist's date that has been transformative. What has been really crucial is that I have been determined to just note down what's happening from often hour to hour. And that has produced a different consciousness of time, a different kind of engagement. And I think it must have happened to you too, that sometimes you have sat in front of, as I have done, let's say it's late night and you have a moment, and somehow, because you're on YouTube, you suddenly see Virender Sehwag batting in Melbourne, and you click on it. And that takes you to Sachin Tendulkar playing in Karachi, or then something else. And then before you know it, an hour has passed. And that is fine. It happens now and then. But having this particular kind of journaling practice doesn't allow your days to pass emptily. And maybe I'm emphasizing, it seems, productivity, but it is, I have to say, I wasted so many years of my youth that I do cherish the time that remains and want to arrive at some aesthetic ideal that is mine, that feels ki bhaiya, haan, ye kaam mera hai. Just, I cannot read the Hindi writer Vinod Kumar Shukla without thinking ki this is Vinod Kumar Shukla. No one else writes like Vinod Kumar Shukla. So, us tarah se, this desire to find a language that is my own, or an idiom that is characteristic, or a certain look in the sketches or the drawings that is mine, I'm committed to that. And I think being committed to an idea of time passing or an engagement with time is a way to get to it.
What comes closest to that ideal of yourself?
Well, I don't know whether you mean, for me, what comes closest is what I see others doing in a way that articulates their personalities or their histories. J.M. Kudria writing about apartheid without always necessarily talking about apartheid seems to me a great thing, Keep waiting for the barbarians doesn't once mention an apartheid regime, but you understand the violence of the apartheid regime from what is portrayed. And I think so. Artists like that, artists who, or the one example that is quoted in very early in the Yellow Book is that of Werner Herzog, the German filmmaker, who decides.
Beautiful example.
Yes, thank you. Who decides he's going to walk from one city to the other, from Paris, I believe. He's going to walk from Germany to Paris. I can't remember because a friend of his has called and said that their common friend, Lottie Eisner, is seriously ill and is probably going to die. And he decides that if he walks, then she will not die. She will live. And that happens. But that's not the point. The point is to have that sort of an artistic vision and then the commitment to undertake travails and travel and travails. That's very striking to me.
I want to use that story to take you in a different direction. So that the story, of course, is that Lotte Eisner is this legendary sort of artist who was a great influence on a bunch of German filmmakers like Werner Herzog, like Wim Wenders, and circa 1974, Herzog got to know that she was really ill and she was expected to die, and he said, and you quote him in your book, quote, "I set off on the most direct route to Paris in full faith, believing that she would stay alive if I came on foot." Stop quote. And as it happens, he got there, she didn't die, and 8 years later, she just felt that her body was too frail, but she wasn't dying, and so she told Herzog, quote, "I am saturated with life. There is still the spell upon me that I must not die. Can you lift it?"
Oh my God, I didn't know this part. I did not know this part. That's amazing.
And 8 days later, she was dead. And this was in the early 80s.
Yeah, man.
And Wim Wenders dedicated his great film Paris, Texas to her. And my question to you is, who is your Lotte Eisner?
Wow. यार ये तो you have shaken me to the core there, because I immediately thought, for some reason, rightly or wrongly, of a woman I used to know 40 years ago when I was young and she was young. We were not lovers, but we saw each other in college. And I found, maybe a year or so ago, the letters I had written to her. No, there were only a few letters I had written to her, because I don't know how I had them. Maybe I made copies. But there were the letters that she wrote to me and from which I glimpsed what I had written to her. So last year, I wrote to her. I said, 40 years later, she's a well-known academic now and a writer. I wrote 40 years later a letter. And I thought, one is, I said to her, we must ask ourselves, what did we know of love? What little we knew of love, and how? I said, you have written books. I have written books. And she said, I have followed from a distance your career. I have read your books. And I said, I have, listening right now to the talk you gave at blah, blah, blah. And I thought we could ask ourselves what it meant to be green with youth and not know what love is and not know what to do with each other, etc. Or at least in my case, maybe she did. I didn't. So for some reason, when you asked that question, I thought, going back in time to find how stupid I was, or how ignorant I was, or simply, more innocently, how young I was, would be one way to think about the Lotte Eisner. But then when I think of how much these people owed to Lotte Eisner, and I think of someone then being someone who is older than you, and someone who has taught you, who would it be? I mean, last time you and I talked, we spoke about Janet Malcolm, for example. When all these women began to die, boss, Susan Sontag, Joan Didion, Janet Malcolm. It's a selfish thought, but I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to meet, Janet Malcolm now. Because Ian Jack, my old friend, was a good friend of Janet Malcolm's. And when I used to see him in New York, I would say, when are you going to take me to meet Janet Malcolm? And he would say, you should come, but it never happened. You know what I'm saying? So all of those are my Lottie Eisners, really. You know, um, in that city course that I told you about, writing about cities, Iphigenia in the Forest Hills is one of her, Janet Malcolm's account of a trial of a doctor accused of killing, of a woman accused of killing her husband. I teach that, and I always think I would have so many questions. I've learned so much from these people. My God. Yes, I would walk from here to Paris if I could keep Janet Malcolm alive.
What are the things you would walk from here to Paris for?
The main thing I would walk is to write about what I would encounter. There are little details in the Herzog story when he is walking. He breaks into a farmhouse or something to find shelter for the night. He meets someone. He drinks milk. He observes the crows. He writes about a road and a highway. I would not necessarily to keep someone alive, though that is a great goal. I would walk that route just so that I could write about it. You know, what would happen? Think of the things that would happen. There would be the enormous problem of the ocean in between, of course, and how to walk on water, which has not been attempted since Jesus, I think. But apart from that, I mean, but yes, you know, walking a long distance. I mean, that is the idea. Travel, travel, travel. This is for all your writer listeners. Travel is a way to open so much. It leads to stories. It gives you ways to rediscover and reformulate yourself. That is, you know, I mean, Pankaj Mishra's Butter Chicken in Ludhiana, for example, and India through, you know, a trip through India's small towns is a great example that anyone should, if I could, I would want to attempt.
Is travel particularly important because it forces you to get outside of yourself? Otherwise, you're in your comfort zone, you're in your own head.
Sahi baat. It is, I always say to my students also, let's say my students are on Instagram. I say to them, have you noticed that when you go to a new town, new place, how many more pictures you take that day for Instagram than you would do otherwise? It gives you new eyes. Also, so much, especially among writers in this age, the engagement with the self can be a bit too much. If you travel, you are putting yourself out into the world. You discover the richness of the world, and that is a wonderful way to really advance the boundaries of your thinking and of your thought and how you define your selfhood.
You mentioned Paris, and one book I love is Italo Calvino's A Hermit in Paris, which is really an early blog. It's all like blog entries, and it's a beautiful book. And elsewhere, not I don't think it's in this book, but elsewhere he has these beautiful lines which bring us back to the subject of journaling and writing every day and all of that. And there he says, quote, "It is only after you have come to know the surface of things that you can venture to know what is underneath. But the surface of things is inexhaustible."
Wow, ये भी अच्छी बात है.
And I'm just thinking aloud, it strikes me that the surface of things is in a sense a whole thing. That when a writer tries to go to what is beneath, you run the risk of losing yourself. But if you engage with the surface hard enough, you will find everything. And in a sense, the act of journaling is perhaps, it seems to me, not too hard to, is not to try too hard to find the interior, but just to stay on the surface, and then the interior will bubble up.
Yeah. The idea should be to observe as faithfully as one can the surface, but always to attempt to understand what is it about. One thing I have found useful is Vivian Gornick's distinction between the situation and the story. What she means by that is the situation is, let's say in an Elizabeth Bishop poem called The Waiting Room, A small child, a girl who is maybe 7 or 8 years old, is in the waiting room. Her aunt is inside, where the dentist is working on her teeth, and she hears her aunt's cry of pain. And Vivian Gornick's point is that the situation is a girl in a waiting room, but the story is a young person's awareness of loneliness or of her separateness or of her sense of the outer world outside. So observe the situation, observe the surface, but let that paragraph be followed by a little observation that summarizes what it is about. For example, Naipaul going to India for the first time and observing what he sees as signs of chaos or filth or underdevelopment, whatever it is. That is the surface. So that is the situation. But what is the story? The story is that of anxiety, is the situation of someone who is an exiled, a child of the indentured migrants who has come back to the ancestral land, who has expected richness and finds a poverty embedded in his imagination, So this movement of how to be acute about the situation or the surface, but also then how to underline it, to summarize it, with that moment of insight. That is it. That has to be done. That necessarily dialectic provides the dynamism to the prose. The most startling example I can think of is again from Vivian Gornick, where she describes a poet who has gone to the New York Pier to let his pet turtle, who has become too big for the aquarium, he is going to throw it into the port. And she says, that is the situation. But the story is this man's relationship to women. And that's like, whoa, that little leap, let's say if there are two electric points and the charge leaps from this point to this other point that is distant from it, that leap is the real leap of the imagination. That is the link that makes it vital. So let there be the surface, and then let it make that link with what is the insight, what it is about.
The great Gekiga artist and storyteller Yoshihiro Tatsumi, one of his short stories is a similar kind of thing where the situation and the story are different. And the situation is that this guy has a pet monkey and he can't look after the pet monkey anymore. So he thinks he should go to the zoo where there is a pit where all the monkeys are, and he should kind of, leave the monkey in its own habitat. And he thinks he's doing it a favor. And he throws the monkey in there, and of course the monkey is slaughtered by the other monkeys immediately in front of his eyes. And that is also such that is a situation, but the story is also so powerful, for which I will link Tatsumi's books from the show notes.
Oh, do so. I have not. That's yes. Oh my God.
So I also then want to ask you that, I know your situation. What is your story, and how has your story evolved over time, in the sense of how do you see yourself? In an early essay, you talk about reading Orwell's Why I Write, and how he telling a story about himself at different points in time, that the author entered the room and there was, a hint of light from the whatever. So, what has been your story for yourself? Because when we are young, like when I look at myself when I was young, I would tell these stories about, oh, so much talent, will write great books, etc., etc. And now those stories are completely pointless, and I'm having to construct an entirely different story on the ruins of that. What have been the core stories that have sort of defined your life and defined yourself to you?
I think you're being too harsh on yourself, but we'll talk about that later. In terms of me, I often think that my real theme is failure. And not failure on an individual level, but failure in the sense that I think most people in the world, the truth of the human condition is that most people in the world fail. We hear stories of success and we gravitate towards them maybe, or celebrate them, or they get sensationalized. But what is the general human condition? I believe the general human condition is that of striving and failure. Simple fact. Most people in the world actually have never used a telephone. So I mean failure in a very loose sense. Most people in the world actually cannot take for granted what you and I take for granted. That sense of deprivation is something that really, really engages me, or it is something that I'm bound to. Now, against that failure is the sense of wanting to record it. And that is also a part of my story, which is the story of, if you see my books, in each book I feel, and this might be a limitation or it might be a strength, I don't know. In each book, it is really the desire and finally the ability to put things down on paper, to record something. That is the story being told, really. In my very first novel, for example, there is a journalist. His brother is a criminal. And at the end, having been asked by someone who resembles Mahesh Bhatt to write a film script about a murder that has taken place in UP, the journalist tries to write his own story and begins to imagine something. A train is coming, is crossing a field. And I feel that idea is that of, okay, so finally of finding words in which your own story can be told. My first non-fiction book, Passport Photos, is being able to tell a story about yourself that the government does not want or cannot expect for you to tell. And so the situation can be whatever, a professor in US teaching, or a writer, or a parent. But the story always has been that of at once a grasping of human failure and the desire to say something about it or to record it. The struggle with it, against it, whatever, on the page. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Continue. But at a personal level, like, what would you daydream about at the age of 25? Do you daydream today? Did you daydream then? How do you see yourself? Who are you? I mean, I'm sure you would have answered that question differently then and now.
At 25, on the day I turned 25, I was a graduate student going to deliver a paper in the US, and I was at an airport, and I asked myself, I've turned 25. How many years will it be before I can write a book? Will I ever be a writer? So I guess there was always the desire, or at least at that age, there was the desire to write and the anxiety to write, the ambition to write, but never the secure knowledge that one would be able to write. Do I daydream? By daydream, you mean a sort of reflection or sort of empty, vague thinking about what one would like to do. I always have. I heard last night Ram Guha saying to you that because you had quoted Rukun Advani saying something about all the ideas that Ram had about books, and Ram says, yeah, I was full of energy, and even now I have different books in my head. Yeah, that's the same with me, actually. I think of 2 or 3 books, and whether I'll be able to write them, whether I'll be able to finish them. That is one's life, yeah.
In Husband of a Fanatic, you had this lovely para where you wrote, as a young man talked, I was reminded of the writer and activist Sonia Jabbar's conversation with an old Pandit woman in a camp in Delhi. The old woman had said to Jabbar that she would survive Delhi's hot summers by sitting in front of the cheap coolers with her eyes shut. She told herself that it was a cool Kashmiri rain and not drops of water from the fans of the cooler caressing her face. What is your Kashmiri rain?
Achha, it's great to, first of all, be called back to these things that one might have one wrote, but I certainly had forgotten. I remember it now. That woman is speaking from a point of such exile. For me, Kashmiri Rain is Lata Mangeshkar singing, तुम न जाने किस जहां में खो गए, हम भरी दुनिया में तन्हा हो गए, हाँ, रह गए. So that is it. That is it. When I was young in Delhi studying in Hindu college and then later at Delhi University, one of the small private pleasures I had was, जैसे भूले बिसरे गीत was a program on All India Radio. So to be able to listen to those songs, to listen to Mukesh or to listen to Lata or S.D. Burman, I would often go for walks, but I would not, those were the days when you didn't have phones like this, which would play something. So, but if I had a transistor, I would always make sure that I tuned in. I would be on a walk, but I would listen to that. Or I would pass by a pawn shop, or sometimes walking on a road and hearing a snatch of a Hindi song from the window of a passing truck or bus was a great delight to me. I was very, 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 very attached to these songs. I still am. So that is my Kashmiri Rain. Those Hindi songs that call me back. I mean, my God. I don't know whether you know Sabrina Dhawan. You should interview her. She wrote Monsoon Wedding. My God. Every time, I listen to a song, I immediately, something that once again, I just try to, I send it to her saying, listen to this. And just the other day, we had gone to watch a film in New York and then we sat in Central Park and हम लोग एक दूसरे को सिर्फ हिंदी गाना सुनाते रहे. We would seek them out on YouTube. I think I have better taste than her, but she's a genius. She has great memory. She remembers words and she can beat anyone in the world in an Antakshari.
Tell me about the songs that mean the most to you. You just gave us a glimpse of one by Lataji. Tell me about others.
Well,
and if you want, tell me about memories attached to them.
There is this, this Mehdi Hasan song, Ranjish Hi Sahi. I think, I was playfully saying to my wife, because she was angry with me about something. So I started singing that. And then I played Ali Sethi, who had sung a wonderful,
beautiful version.
Wonderful version. Farida Khanam's. So many songs, boss. Jaise ki, many people, certainly I had an uncle who always dissed Mukesh. But I thought, Saranga Teri Yaad Mein was a great song. In Yaar, Gaurav Chintamani, you will give us a pause while I quickly look for a song which appears. 1 minute mein batata hu.
I think.
Yes, I have found it. To acha. Okay. So, yaar Amit, I told you I have a novel coming out called My Beloved Life.
Wow,
and early in the novel, my protagonist has gone for his college friend's wedding. And this is the 1950s. On the train, they have been listening to Binaka Geetmala. And one of his friends sings, Mohabbat kar lo, ji bhar lo, aji kisne roka hai. Now, these were songs that were so lively. There was really celebrations. And I've always appreciated that about these Hindi songs. So they are calls to a communal living. Samajh rahe ho? They cannot be simply sung alone. They have to be sung with friends or to be sung with one other person. And that was true of Hindi films, has been true of Hindi films as a major strain for the longest time. For example, Sudhanva Deshpande, who is a left activist and publisher and writer and a dramatist in Delhi, he once said to me that Purane filmon mein, you'll see ki bhai, hero has gone to, let's say, a tea estate. The song he sings is not just him singing. Actually, the workers also participate. They also move their hands. And it becomes a situation where it is always a social thing. And that is wonderful about Hindi films. Now, in this book, after getting drunk at this wedding, my protagonist decides he should write a letter. But can he write a letter to? The alcohol he has drunk, the songs he has heard, has moved him immensely, and he wants to share some emotion with someone. So he writes to a girl in his village, and he says, I thought of you just now because we were listening to Binaka Geetmala on the transistor radio. And when I heard Lata Mangeshkar singing, Mera dil ye pukare aja, mere gam ke sahare aja, it struck me that it is likely that the song was playing in our village too. Were you listening to the show on the radio tonight? I want to believe that you were. These are the ways in which one misses home. My thoughts tonight turn toward our village, my parents, my friends, in a way very different from how I usually feel when I'm in Patna. The whole world is the night around me. Home is the lamp burning in the distance. Do you know what I mean? And then he says, I hope you're well, and then ends with a flourish. Health is wealth. but you get the point. You know,
Yeah.
these songs, I often think are things that are calling me back to my deeply felt emotions. There's nostalgia there, but also a certain kind of reckoning and sense of loss. And yeah, that's it.
I just recorded an episode with Ranjit Hoskote, which in fact comes out tomorrow, but obviously you haven't heard it yet because it's not out. But in that, Ranjit speaks about how one of the things that people don't realize about Hindustani classical is that the whole mahal at a Hindustani classical concert was very different from, say, a Western classical. Western classical, you're supposed to sit with decorum and just listen. Hindustani classical, there will be interruptions. Performers will talk to the audience will talk back. And today he laments that is kind of changing, and people just sit and listen, and it's become like a much more sort of static experience. My words, not his. And I wonder if what you say about our music being communal, and in a sense the most exuberant kind of performative stage for Hindi film music is the Antakshari, and that is the very definition of communal. And one begins to wonder that, one, if that communal sense is lost, and B, then does that change the kind of music that is being produced today?
Yeah. You know, when Ranjit Hoskote delivers his how shall I say, in his crystalline language, whole paragraphs that seem to have been cast in marble, in a communal display, I always feel like saying wah, 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 and others join in. So, anyway, has it been lost? Well, I haven't read this new book that has come out on Hindutva pop called H pop, but I'm curious about it. The communal aspect has not been lost. It has been transformed. It has been perverted. You can be in a Ramnami procession and a song will be playing, and the communal display there is where people can shout anti-Muslim slogans and dance in front of the masjid. So the communal or the social has not entirely been lost, but it has been perverted. It has been distorted. And I guess that, one will often think, what is the way out? And I think when we retreat and offer thoughts that can only be offered in sort of an individual seclusion, then that is a response to it. An artist, for example, sitting in her room, writing a protest song, might be responding to it, and that's a genuine response. Can there be a communal response? I mean, that is what a protest is, when people take on the streets and speak in one voice. And I'm often guilty of not joining in such protests because my greater commitment has been to sitting in a room and fashioning something that can be used in a protest. So those are my thoughts on that matter.
You spent a lot of time in India in the last couple of years. You've written about it a lot also in the Yellow Book. And give me a sense of your impressions in this time, because now that you are also simultaneously journaling, I am guessing that there is a quality in your noticing that is sort of enhanced. And also, what happens is that when you go away and you come back, you see things that a person who is constantly here does not see, that is normalized for people like me. So give me a sense of, and in a sense, then what you have is you have a series of snapshots or a series of films. You visit, you see it, and then you go away, and then you come back, and everything is kind of stalker for you. What were your like? Give me an impressionistic sense of what it has been like over the last couple of years. Um,
Yeah.
you know, uh,
Uh, I don't know whether I ever mentioned to you, but for me, I started writing Husband of a Fanatic, or that I went to Gujarat after the Gujarat riots, because I was inspired by Haruki Murakami, who had been in the US when the SARS attack happened in the Tokyo subways. He thought he would go back, and he produced a book out of it. He would go back and talk to people. He would interview them. He would do these long scale interviews. And then he would, it was his way of entering back into the nation's life, you know. And I have felt a little bit of that as a necessity in more recent times because of I mean, um, my most visceral sense in the last few years of going back is how normalized, how easy it is, how accepted it is to be Islamophobic in ordinary conversations. That is, that has been very, very, um, very apparent to me. Someone, like anyone from someone I try to interview, let's say outside of mandir or outside of masjid, or talk within my own family. Some remark. Now, some people in my family must be aware, for example, that I'm married to a Muslim. But somehow, even that is forgotten. And someone will say things so routinely that it just strikes me as, wow. So that has been a major change. The extreme polarization that is evident. One part of the country believing that what is happening is wrong. One part of the country believing that what is happening is utterly right. Amazes me. Um, I'm trying to talk to people. I have been. And it always amazes me that people who have suffered the most under certain policies, for example, demonetization or the lockdown, still think that, well, if the state has done it, तो कुछ सोच कर ही किए होंगे. That is another. In this, I've mentioned now this book a couple of times, My Beloved Life. In My Beloved Life, I've discussed a video I'd seen during the lockdown, the lockdown, but during actually the second wave. A woman says that she was in Lucknow, I believe, a young woman. She says that she had spent about 40,000 rupees getting oxygen for her father, and now the oxygen was finishing. And the chief minister of that state had declared that there was enough oxygen, and if anyone said that there was not enough oxygen, they'd be arrested. And in that video, the woman had said, she removed her mask and she said, मैं यहीं खड़ी हूं, आ जाओ साले, अगर हिम्मत है तुमको तो आकर मुझको अरेस्ट करो अभी. Because she was, and I feel that even that desperation of people who had seen so many deaths, despite all of that, despite all the inefficiencies, despite all that electioneering that turned this pandemic into a wider pandemic, the people in power will still spin it into a success story. And they will get the votes during the next elections. So those are the things I see. And that disturb me a lot.
of all the sort of the art in the yellow book, the painting that I loved the most that really spoke to me is called Too Many Hurried Goodbyes.
Ah,
And it's kind of abstract, and I don't want to even describe it because it is so moving. And it's kind of accompanied by that period. The Too Many Hurried Goodbyes are, of course, about all the deaths in the second wave where they come one after another. And you have these beautiful lines also where you say, "This was on 25th April 2021 when I got news of the death of an uncle in Bhagalpur from COVID. When I was quite young, I would watch him swim across the broad breadth of the Ganga, his body becoming tiny in the distance, and then swimming back, making that impossible return to being life-sized again." Stop quote. What a beautiful line. And it struck me while looking at that painting that I would not have been moved by it if I did not know what the title was and if I did not know what the context was. Too Many Hurried Goodbyes, and then you see these frames of red, and it just has that kind of impact on you. But without context, it is almost nothing. And I was reminded of that because you also, just now what you're saying is absolutely correct, that I think what happens with history is that the context is stripped away and other narratives are superimposed on that, and then you're like, oh, all these great things have happened and we controlled the pandemic and we did this and we did that, and somehow the harsh reality of what happened is just completely lost. And I simply don't get it, because to me, COVID and especially the second wave was worse than the horror of partition, in the sense that the horror of partition struck certain parts of the country. COVID struck every household. And what is this mechanism? Like, I remember in one of your books you talk about going back to a village where there was this Muslim gentleman whose entire family had been slaughtered a few years ago, and you go there and you find that he's living with another wife, and it's like that never happened. He's managed to get on with a start living normally again. And yeah, it's not really a question, it's just, just sort of,
yeah.
it's a lament like yours.
On one page, you see an image, and then when you turn the page, I learned this from, and when you turn the page, you see another. Sometimes you have the context with it, sometimes you turn the page and you have another image and another context. I learned this from John Berger. When I was very young, I think I must have been not even 20, I read Ways of Seeing in Delhi by John Berger. And he presents you a picture. And it's a picture, you see it, and it is a corned field, and there are crows flying over it. And maybe it says there that Van Gogh. And then you turn the page, and then you learn. He says, does your sense of the image change if I tell you that this was the last painting that Van Gogh made before he killed himself? I'm now looking at the book. He says paintings are often reproduced with words around them. And then below we see it. This is a landscape of a cornfield with birds flying out of it. Look at it for a moment. Then turn the page. And then when you turn the page, it says, this is the last picture that Van Gogh painted before he killed himself. And then it says, it is hard to define exactly how the words have changed the image, but undoubtedly they have. The image now illustrates the sentence. And I always think that the role of the artist is somehow, at some point, to dislocate a picture from the meaning that has been assumed and to supply a new caption to the image. If in India you go around today, at every billboard, at every petrol pump, at every corner shop, you see a face, a large face on a billboard. And I think the task of an original or creative artist, of a public artist, of a political artist, would be to supply a new caption for that image everywhere, to displace the meaning that has been attached to it by most people, and to produce a new meaning. How to do it? How to do it powerfully? That's the question.
You spoke of Van Gogh's last painting, and that reminded me of an album by Warren Zevon called The Wind. And album of beautiful songs, but the context here is that when he recorded it, he knew he was going to die. So this was like a goodbye album. He got all his friends to come in and play guitar with him and sing with him, and his longtime lover, I forget the man's name, he was also kind of there. And it's beautiful. And to me, everything in this album is imbued with this extra meaning that the guy who wrote these words knows he's going to die. There's a beautiful love song called El Amor de mi Vida, and that has these lines: I look outside, I know you're there, and you found a brand new life somewhere. I only wish it had been us, but I'm happy for your happiness. Just beautiful,
Yeah, but
a beautiful goodbye.
yes, 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 yes. And communal also, communal. It's a social response because it's not the man dying alone. It's the man celebrating life with his friends.
Yeah, and in that moment, kind of finding life again as they play music together, it's quite beautiful. I've forgotten what question I was going towards, which perhaps. Okay, let me kind of ask you this. You begin the Yellow Book with this beautiful quotation, which I think you also mentioned in your last episode, and it's by David Hockney. What does a world look like? I don't think it looks like photographs. You have to find out for yourself. You have to draw it. Stop quote. And when I read this, it reminded me of how elusive the nature of reality is, that we can only get snatches of it at a time. This reminded me of two other quotes I love. One is by Georges Simenon, where he says, the fact that we are, I don't know how many millions of people, yet complete communication is completely impossible between any two of these people, is to me one of the biggest tragic themes in the world. Stop quote. And he said this was like the leitmotif. So just as Hockney seems to suggest, or I can draw from that you can never know the world, equally Simenon is suggesting you can never know another person, and you're always kind of trapped in your own head. And there's a great quote by Iris Murdoch which also plays to this, where she says, quote, love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. Stop quote. So
First of all,
own.
Can you do the second quote again? Love is the
love.
Yes.
Love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real.
Yeah, but wow. Yes.
And I'm thinking about then, at one level, this makes us feel desperately sad, as Simenon did, that we can never truly know another person and no other person can truly know us. But at the same time, through Kafka once spoke of literature as, I think, breaking through the frozen ice of the soul, or whatever. I forget the exact words, but that's what art gives is, it gives these snapshots, and you can recognize yourself in them, and you can connect with others in that. And so what is sort of your sense about this? Because I think for every artist, it is on the one hand empowering that you can capture some of the world, but on the other hand, it must always feel inadequate, that you can never capture enough of it.
Yeah. Since you quoted Iris Murdoch, and because we have been talking about aloneness and communal living or social living, Iris Murdoch also said that the definition of a happy life is to find 13 people you find absolutely fascinating. Okay? So, whenever the name Murdoch is mentioned, I always think about, when Iris Murdoch is mentioned, I always think, where are my 13 people? Who are they? And at the heart of that question is the question, who am I? And who do I seek in the, and what do I seek in the other? And if you have that answer, you also have an answer to what is it that you believe in, what your art can do. For me, it's very important really to think, there's a lot of bad writing and there's a lot of bad art being produced. There's actually, even more than bad art and bad writing, there is bad journalism. There is a dishonest journalism, especially if we speak about India. There is a journalism of utter servitude that is being produced. So if I then step back from that, then I think of bad writing or bad art as being a writing of bad faith, where, for example, where you appeal to emotion, where you yourself don't believe in that emotion, or you appeal to emotion only as emotion, not as thought, when it is a kind of bald sentimentalism, vagara. So for me, it's very important for my own sanity and my own sense of integrity to think at once about how to produce art that is not in bad faith, that is not trying to seek popularity or greater number of readers by just for no other reason than to get more readers. And it is a desire to find solidarity with that 12 or 13 people whom I revere or cherish. I think to collect these people, like let's say someone who has died, Janet Malcolm or Susan Sontag, to have them as your witnesses. One of the quotes I have is, I know that you like Joan Didion also, so here's a quote. See enough, this is from Joan Didion. See enough and write it down, I tell myself. And then some morning, when the world seems drained of wonder, someday when I'm only going through the motions of doing what I'm supposed to do, on that bankrupt morning, I will simply open my notebook, and there it will all be. A forgotten account with accumulated interest, paid passage back to the world out there. And I read this line, and I think of her then as a kindred spirit who is teaching me how to journal, or why to value journals, and why to value a certain desire to inscribe the ordinary and the everyday in order to return to something valuable. So that is my interest in art, boss. Yesterday, what I also did in the morning was listen to Radio 4, BBC Radio 4. Hanif Qureshi was guest editing on Boxing Day, and they still had that up. He was guest editing that day's show, and he was just, because on the previous year's Boxing Day, he had had his accident when he became paralyzed. So to listen to a writer being so honest about all that he's going through, and to give it through his honesty, the shape of art, it's very valuable to me. And I think of him then as one of the 12 or 13 people I want as my, in my circle. Shall we take a break here and make sure that when I come back, you can anticipate? I know that you will say, let's take a break or something like that. But I'm just suggesting that because I realize that we're at halfway time, and I want to see what will be the artful way to to keep answering your questions, but to just keep pushing back with a couple of leading queries I have for you to get out your truths. I think your own listeners, frankly, should understand you better. Why are you succeeding in the way you are in communicating something? What is your secret? Well, you have been generous enough to ask people, but someone should ask you this question, and we should get to some things. So I want to be able to do that too, if you don't mind.
I shall submit to you, and we won't edit any of what you just said, so just to sort of keep the flow going.
Oh, damn.
So yeah, let's go in for a break, get a cup of coffee, and I shall submit to whatever you want me to submit to at the other side.
Thanks, boss.
Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've enjoyed teaching 27 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing, and an online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, and a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs Rs 10,000 plus GST, or about $150. If you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just a willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you.
Welcome back to Seen and Unseen with Amit Verma. I'm just the guest interviewer right now. My name is Amitava Kumar. I'm going to talk to Amit. We'll find all those things about him that he asks his guests. So let's start by asking Amit. Amit, you have a more artful way of going about asking these questions, but please tell me, where were you born and when were you born?
I'm flattered by your interest. I should point out, by the way, that this idea has been had before by guests, and in episode 200 of The Seen and the Unseen, Shruti Rajgopalan spoke to some 30 of my guests, recorded questions from them for me, and we did a 5-hour episode. So Ram Guha also recorded, Harsha Bhogle, various people asked me questions, which were very kindly recorded by Shruti.
That is wonderful. That is great. I'll now have to check that out.
Yeah.
Let's hope that because Shruti Rajgopalan ignored me.
Oh my God!
I have. I mean, in other words, I wasn't asked this question.
You,
and I
we
think that's
hadn't
because
we hadn't recorded together then. This was episode
yes,
200.
yes. Say, समझ गया. Maybe I was 226 or something like that. All right. But I hope to get to something
Sure.
that maybe some of these guests did not, and I'll explain in a moment. But tell me, where were you born and when you were born?
So I was born in Chandigarh at the end of 1973. And there's a gentleman in your book you mentioned who has had his arm raised since 1973 because he had taken a vow that he will, for the honor of Shiva, he will raise his arm and never bring it down. So I, in fact, wrote a little poem about that a short while back when I was reading your book, where I thought that, the Bhai Sahib, for the entirety of my life, his arm has been up. And let me read it out.
Okay, so
Why not?
do you have the poem in front of you?
Yeah. So there's a story behind this also. I'm working for my YouTube show, Everything is Everything, with these two wonderful young people, Namsita and Vaishnav. They are 19 and 22 respectively, but they're incredibly talented and wonderful. So they got me this really old school diary. Sadly, in an audio podcast, you don't get a sense of it, but I'm showing it on video to you now. And it's these parchments, and they made me promise that every day I will write something. So today I remembered that I haven't written anything today. So this is what I wrote, and this is to Amar Bharati, who is a gentleman. And it's like a short prose poem. It's like really short. For all my life since 1973, you have had your arm raised. If you lowered it, would you feel that you had lost an arm? So,
very good.
Anyway, so yeah,
I like that.
I mean, I don't care if
So,
it's
yes,
good or bad. करना चाहिए बस. मतलब, you got to exercise your brain. So
That's exactly right. For our listeners, we should tell them that Amar Bharati is, you can Google him. He's this gentleman who has had his arm raised and his nails have gone long. He has not touched them. His arm has shriveled. And I made his discovery in a French novel. It is the one that is called I think it was in the Meursault Investigation by Kamel Dadu, I think is the name. Very good. So you have been on this planet since 1973.
yeah, the end of 1973. So I was born in Chandigarh. My dad was an IS officer. My mother was technically a housewife, but a Hindustani classical musician who would, do things in the arts. Wrote a couple of books as well. Published writers' workshop in Calcutta, all of that. And so from the time I was very young, I had sort of the serendipitous good fortune of being surrounded by all kinds of books. And that's kind of at a very early age, I discovered a love of literature. Unfortunately, my mother would keep trying to teach me music, and I would steadfastly refuse for really stupid reasons. And I now regret that. So, one of my resolutions for this year is that I'm going to learn an instrument, and I'm going to practice 1 hour a day, and I'm going to learn something. So I'm just about to choose between like a keyboard and a guitar. But leaving that aside, so
Yes.
none of my childhood was goal directed. So in that sense, again I was very lucky. ऐसा कुछ नहीं था कि IIT के exams करना है, ये करना है, वो करना है. Also, there was zero pressure on me to either join the IAS like my dad or to do medical engineering or even an MBA, the standard things of those days.
What did you end up doing?
So I decided I want to be a writer, and in the stupid way of someone in the late 1980s who's trying to figure out like what does that really mean. I finished my college in 94, and I said कि ठीक है writer करना है, let me take an adjacent profession because writers don't make money. तो मैं advertising में चले जाता हूँ, copywriter बनता हूँ, and then one day I will write books. But for now I can make a living by writing. But I spent a few months in HTA Delhi. HTA is today J. Walter Thompson. Then it was India's #1 ad agency. Spent a few months there. Our office then was in Jhandewala in Delhi. Didn't like it very much, but I was very excited by something that had just started in Bombay, which was Channel V. and Channel V had just started. There were exciting things happening with, Quick Gun Murugan, if you remember. So I just upped and left one day. On a Friday, I got to Bombay. On a Monday, I had a job in Channel V. So I was in Channel V between 95 and 97 writing scripts. I then shifted to MTV between 97 to 99, doing more of the same thing but at a more senior level. 99, I realized that this is fuck all. This is like a shallow life. Nothing is happening. At the same time, I wasn't ready to write anything because I didn't have the lived experience and I wasn't even a good writer. In our earlier episode, and I think in the Blue Book, you mentioned about how writing is equal to waiting. And it was kind of like that for me. So the question was like, what do I do now that I'm waiting? I tried entrepreneurship circa 99. So for about a year and a half, I tried entrepreneurship, but the Nasdaq crash happened in 2000. I failed utterly. In fact, went deeply into debt. Those were the days before venture capital and stuff. And I mean, it wasn't the same industry that it is today. And sort of devastated by that failure, I took the first job that I could, which was that of a cricket writer in this magazine called Wisden. There was a physical magazine called Wisden Asia Cricket, and we were connected to, the legendary Wisden Almanac in England. And so I was there for a while. Then we bought Cricinfo in 2003. I became the managing editor there. But writing only about cricket was kind of boring, and also cricket was happenstance for me. It wasn't a core passion. I love the game, and I think I came to understand it very well, but it wasn't a core passion. So I started a blog called India Uncut, which I then did for, which was active for about 5 years between 2003, 2004 to about 2009. I would do 5 posts a day. I did some 8,000 posts in that time. We know each other since that time. And the scene with blogging was that it gave me the freedom to write about anything else, not just cricket. It gave me a freedom of form. I was no longer restricted to the 800 words a newspaper would give you. I could do 80 words. I could do 8,000 words. You were not dependent on a news cycle or what was topical. You did not have to go through any gatekeepers. It was incredibly liberating. And initially, I didn't take it seriously at all. So therefore, there wasn't even the typical writer's anxiety of thinking, what will the readers think? It was just a blog. I just put paras out there and did it. And no doubt a lot of that would make me cringe, but it was like a writing gym, which kind of helped me polish my skills. Then towards the end of that decade, I decided that bahut ho gaya, I need to write a book. And I kind of came to an agreement with Cricinfo that, I'll move from being like a managing editor to a consulting editor. I'll come in once in a while. I'll do things in certain areas, and so that was my transition out of there. And my mom fell ill with pancreatic cancer in 2008, and she was dying at the time. She had a few weeks to go, and in that time also, coincidentally, I decided that I'm going to throw away all my great ideas for the great Indian novel, and I'm going to try and write a book. And the idea was that I'm just going to start with a situation, as it were. Try and write 1,000 words a day and see if I have the discipline to write 1,000 words a day and whether I can maintain a narrative. So in 5 weeks, I had a draft, and the sensible thing for me to do would have been to chuck it away or keep it in a drawer and look at it after another year. I sent it to a friend of ours, Nilanjana Roy, who was then a publisher at Westland. So she said, Amit, I really like it. I will publish it, but I am your friend. So let me tell you, you should show it to all the other publishers. So I did, and there was a little bit of a bidding war, and I got completely carried away. At this moment, I didn't have perspective. I had written a very slight book of slight ambition, and I think I really let myself down, and I didn't realize it then. And there was this bidding war, and I got carried away. And then Hachette, which was then the world's second largest publisher, said, we will launch in India with your book. We'll take you on a 5-city tour and put you up in 5 stars and all of that. And I got carried away, and I said, okay, let me go with this. I went with that. The book sold well. I happen to have the e-rights of it, so I have deliberately made a choice not to put it on Kindle. Perhaps I'm overreacting, but I felt that I really let myself down with that book, and I think people kind of expected a lot more of me. I remember you, Amitava, Kumar, were kind enough to give me a blurb for that book, which is...
Yes, but tell the audience the title first.
The title was My Friend Sancho. Yes. I mean, it makes no sense unless you read the book, but it was like a coming-of-age love story set in Bombay. And I think I did an okay job getting down the voice of the narrator. The narrator was a young man in his 20s. It was written in a first-person voice. I think I nailed the voice. But because I was a young man writing my first book, people automatically assume that I am that person, that is my voice.
Yes.
And therefore, you can think, oh, it's an immature guy, he's whatever, etc., etc. So that kind of happened. And another interesting thing that happened during this period was I went to Goa. and I had played poker on my phone with myself in this game where you play with yourself, and I was struck by the intellectual challenge because for me, I've realized that I didn't know it then, but I've realized over time that what really gets me going, the core thing I love to do, the core skill I have is to find a subject, go to first principles, figure it out from first principles, and that intellectual challenge fascinates me. And poker, of course, is a game of skill, involves math and game theory and all that. So I love that. And I went to poker and I went to Goa and I had a lucky weekend, a beginner's luck. And that got to my head and I said कि यार देखो, writing is my other great passion. कुछ पैसे नहीं बना, बनने भी नहीं वाले. And I was a little distraught by the fact that I let myself down with the book because I was just beginning to realize at this time that यार ये क्या कर दिया, I shouldn't have published this. And so I said, but my second passion is poker. I can make money with this. Let me try that. So for 5 years, I was like a professional poker player. And I did well. Number of things happened. One thing was that poker requires obsession. And to the point that you have to shut the rest of the world out. And there's this biography of an American poker player, I forget who said that for the 30 years that he played poker, he didn't know who the president of the US was. And that is a level of absorption that it requires. So I realized over 5 years that I felt like I've gotten stupider. I've stopped hanging out with my other non-poker friends. I'm not reading books. I'm not listening to music. I'm not thinking new thoughts. It's crazy. It also destroys your lifestyle because everything is you play a 40-hour session, you sleep for 10 hours, and then you're off to another 40-hour session. Now, there's an interesting realization I made during this period. When I got into poker, my thinking was that it's a game of skill. 5% of people make money. So what's going to happen is the winners will stay in the game, the losers will cycle out. When I left, I realized, and it was a heartbreaking realization, that it's actually the winners who leave. The winners leave because they are winning because they are just generally good thinkers, they're good at other things. They will find other things to do. The losers are the ones who never leave because they are addicted. It's because after all, at one level it's game theory, math, it's a science, but at another level it is gambling. You can play it like you play Teen Patti or Rummy or any other gambling game, and I have seen lives destroyed by it, lives of friends destroyed by it. I have tried to make interventions and failed because when people are addicted, an intervention doesn't help. So that was one of the factors that I felt I have to leave. Also, it had kind of messed up my lifestyle completely. I was, I had put on some 15-20 kilos. It just didn't feel worth it. And I had saved enough to say that, ठीक है, 1-2 साल काम नहीं करना पड़ेगा, किताब लिखेंगे, वो सब करेंगे. And
so when did you leave? Around
I left
2018?
No, I left in 2015. And
2015,
I was writing perhaps the only column on poker in a mainstream newspaper in the world. I was writing a column for the Economic Times on poker. I'll link it from the show notes. So installment 42 was titled Why I Loved and Left Poker, which is around the time I left it. So people will get some perspective. And then the thing is, I never actually did the writing. I kind of stumbled around here and there. I was editor of a policy magazine called Pragati for a while. In 2017, I started The Seen and the Unseen, and it was just like a casual side project kind of thing.
Okay. Stop. Slow down. You started that in 2017, Seen and Unseen. And at that time, were there one or two podcasts that you really liked and you thought, अरे ऐसा तो हम भी कर सकते हैं, या I should do something a little different? कैसे? How did the thought come to you?
So, India में तो कुछ नहीं था. There was this company called IVM Podcasts, which is run by a guy called Amit Doshi. So Amit approached me and said that you want to do a podcast, and I've always had 40 ideas for things to do in my head. And one of them was, why don't I do a show on YouTube called The Seen and the Unseen, where The Seen and the Unseen, the title is inspired by this famous essay from the French essayist Frédéric Bastiat, That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen, which is about the...
You got an award with his name on it, if I remember right?
I got an award twice with his name on it, the Bastiat Prize. So,
okay,
yeah. So
you own him.
I owed him. And so the idea was that it'll be about the unintended consequences of public policy, and instead of doing a YouTube show, ठीक है, podcast कर लेता हूँ. Episodes will be 10 minute होंगे, 15 minute होंगे, because people have a short attention span. That's what I thought. And I realized very soon that is wrong for 3 reasons. One is that people listen to podcasts on their smartphones when they're a captive audience. So you're either commuting or you're working out or you're doing errands. So if you're out running, for example, you're not going to keep changing the channel. Whereas if you're watching a YouTube channel, you could click on another of the 300 tabs you have open. You can turn your head and talk to someone, etc., etc. But with an audio podcast, you've chosen to be a captive audience. Reason number 2 is that people listen typically at much higher speeds. 2x is very natural. The brain can comprehend words easily at 500 words a minute. We speak at about 160. So 2x, 3x is easily done for power listeners, and people crave depth. The media is basically going a mile wide and an inch deep. Like you correctly said a while back, that a lot of the journalism today shouldn't even be called journalism, and people actually crave depth. We have that short attention span mode. Even I will be scrolling and swiping randomly at times, but when you want to know something, you want to know something, you want to kind of dig in. So there are really, 4 phases of the evolution of this podcast. Should I go through them, or do you have any?
Just a second.
Sure.
When you thought of this podcast, was it from the very beginning that you decided that it should be about, as the announcer says in the beginning, about politics, economics, and behavioral science?
Yeah, we never changed that. I mean, actually, that's completely inaccurate now. But we never changed that. And my partnership.
Why is it inaccurate?
It's inaccurate because it's not just about those subjects. It's not just about politics,
yes.
economics, and whatever. It's really about everything. It's about human beings. It's about life. So it's a full canvas of things. And by the way, I parted ways with IVM Podcasts after a couple of years. So I've been doing it alone for the last 4-5 years. And the show evolved. I mean, there are these distinct evolutions that took place. The first evolution was when, instead of tackling a particular subject, like why are price controls bad, I would take a deep dive into a subject. Like, I've done episodes on Article 370 Kashmir with Srinath Raghavan, or education in India with Karthik Mullaradharan. So the first move was deep dives into subjects which could be 2, 3, 4 hours. The second move, which has been massively rewarding, is a deep dive into people, which is almost akin to oral history, where initially what happened is I would do a deep dive into subjects and I would think कि आधा घंटा इनके background के बारे में बात करते हैं, let's humanize them for the listener, let's take him out of his soundbite mode and get him using his own language, and then we can the conversation flows better. And then I realized that, boss, actually that is a whole meat. And I just fell in love with that aspect of exploring somebody's life for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. Last year I had 3 8-hour episodes with Shanta Gokhale, Jerry Pinto, and KP Krishnan, and I cherish each of them, and they were all very kind to give me so much
How
time.
many people listen to those 8-hour? I mean, first of all, actually tell me, how many people listen to each show on an average?
30 to 50,000 downloads, but downloads I think are often measured as somebody who's heard 70% of the thing. So the thing with numbers is, so for example, in a month I get about 250,000 downloads. That's between 200,000 to 250,000, and this number has plateaued for a while. So it's not even, you don't divide it by 4 and say that's the episodes this month got that. A lot of binging also happens. And the key thing to note about the listenership, which is another great realization I made about podcasts, is that podcasting will typically give you lower numbers in YouTube but far higher engagement. So I keep saying I'd rather have 100,000 people listen to an episode than 10 million people watch a YouTube video, because YouTube video mein your average time of watching might be 15 seconds, 20 seconds, while over here people are really deeply engaged. So my average session time at one point I calculated was 40 minutes, which is off the charts. You tell me that in the OTs, I'm like, if you're a really sticky video game, you're getting 40-minute sessions, otherwise no freaking way, right? That was the average, and people listen across multiple sessions. So that is the thing, that I had no way of understanding what those numbers were. It took me a lot of time to understand what those numbers were and how much the show means to people, and it took me by surprise.
Wow. Now, why do you think, I'm very interested in understanding why you think people would listen to anything for hours? Why?
Because,
and they do, but and the next question I will ask, or in your manner I will put 2 complex questions in the same question, and it's amazing to me that you always remember your questions, which is, why do people listen to for such a long time? And B, in a show that has often used the word tehra, or slowness, why do people, and why do you think it's a good idea for people to speed up the delivery? So both parts of the question, if you could answer that, then people will understand what they are doing when they are listening to you too?
I'll answer the second part first. That actually the Therav remains, even if you, because what happens is you take it to 1.2x, that normalizes, you take it to 1.5x, that normalizes. What happens is the brain is adjusting. So you're not missing the gaps, you're not missing the pauses, you're not missing the meaningful intonation of something in a particular way. You get all the nuance. The brain just normalizes to the extent that when I hear myself at 1x, I'm like, who the fuck is this retard? Matlab, kya bol raha hai? Hurry up.
Wow.
So it
Wow,
really
I see.
sounds like a slow drawl. Like if you listen to yourself at half speed, that is the kind of feeling I get when I listen to myself at 1x, or most things at 1x. I mean, live telecasts of sports, you don't have a choice. So the brain normalizes that completely. Now, as far as the first question of why, one reason is that it's a circumstance, it's a situation that you are out running, ek ghanta aap kya karoge, or you're on a local train, ek ghanta aap kya karoge. Now you could listen to music, or you could listen to an interesting conversation. And and apparently I think a long time back someone shared with me that 30% of the people who listen to audio prefer talk to music. It's just inbuilt, it is almost hardwired, and it's across the world, across cultures. So it is true in America, where there is a rich culture of talk radio. It is true in India, where there isn't. So actually 30% of the people are just wired, they prefer talk. And also, it's an incredibly efficient way of taking in information / entertainment. Like when I did my 3-hour 15-minute episode with Karthik Muralidharan, which I think was one of my first 3-hour episodes on education, he got it transcribed, and of course he speaks fast, and it came to some 45,000 words, 45,000 words. Now अगर आप डबल स्पीड पे सुन रहे हो तो 1.5 घंटे में आपको 45,000 वर्ड्स हो गया, which is half a book, or which is even a good short monograph. So you're taking in that amount of directed conversation, of thought-provoking content, if it is done well, in such a short period of time, that it becomes incredibly efficient. Now people may not have the time to actually read books, and reading 45,000 words would take much longer, but you can listen to a conversation and take in all that information. And part two of what I would say is, it's not just about information. A conversation is more than that. When you and I are talking, a transcript would not be as satisfying, I believe, because there is an ebb and flow in the conversation. There is, the way we are responding to each other. Beach mein somebody will think of something, and you'll kind of interject with that. So there is a flow, there is a vibe, there is a mood that has an enormous amount of pleasure on its own, which I don't think is possible to sort of.
Let's round up this part of the discussion by asking you, who are your listeners? What is their profile?
So the thing with podcasts is that podcast analytics are notoriously, you can't go very deep, because podcasts are spread through RSS feeds and etc., and it's very backward. That's also a reason.
The RSS is even in that?
Sarji, RSS तो हर जगह पहुंच गया है. I should have expected that. Yeah, there's no getting away from RSS. हर जगह.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't have deep analytics, but I get a sense of it spans age groups. But there would be English-speaking elites. There is unfortunately no way around that. So English-speaking people in cities would very much be who the audience is. And I mean, I don't have any deeper demographics in that.
Okay. Well, that's good. One of the things one finds in your questions is that you are very widely read. Sometimes you drop names of people, of artists, musicians, even writers who I should know more about, which I have no clue about. So I wanted to just clarify something. You mentioned in passing that you were a student. You did college, I believe, in Pune. What did you study in college?
Oh, I studied English literature, and my purpose for studying English literature was I wanted to optimize for least number of visits to classrooms. So I think in my BA, in the 3 years that I did my Bachelor of Arts in Ferguson College, Pune, I maybe went inside a classroom 4 times. And so I just wanted something that was easy, and I just wanted to scrape through, because I correctly realized that education is not something you will get in a classroom. Now you might ask, what did I do outside the classroom? What education did I get there? Nothing much, matar gashti, or however it goes. So just kind of chilled out, and those are the days before the internet and all that. So whatever youthful energy and hunger I might have had did not even have an outlet or a direction or whatever. You kind of stumble through life and take whatever it throws at you.
Now, because you often in your writing I know in your shows, do one thing useful, which is to provide the show notes, which takes people to different readings. I wonder whether I'm sure you know this book, but I wonder whether you have ever provided Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Have you ever linked it, or can you talk about it?
I'm sure I've linked it 3-4 times. I mean, obviously I was familiar with Kahneman and Tversky's work well before the book came out. But
why obviously? It just because explain that.
That's an extremely arrogant thing to say. I should not have said that. But because I was reading widely in the subject anyway. I was reading about behavioral science and behavioral economics, and a lot of which seems to have been built upon a crumbling edifice now that there are all these replication errors. But I was reading widely. Like, my gateway into a lot of literature actually was Steven Pinker's great book, The Blank Slate. And that led me to discover, on the one hand, evolutionary psychologists and writers like Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and all that. So that was one kind of rabbit hole. There was another rabbit hole into cognitive neuroscience, and, again, reading about Michael Gazzaniga's famous experiments before he wrote his book Human, and at the same time also into behavioral economics and the behavioral sciences. So it's wonderful how sometimes a single book can be a gateway and can take you in so many marvelous directions. Have you had books like that which were a gateway to you?
Yeah, but I'm not going to let you do that to me because because it is now my turn to ask you these questions, and we arrive at something.
I'm noting it down. Yes, I will ask you at the end anyway.
I'm thinking of this book also as one of those, but I think that from the kinds of responses I have gotten from appearing on your show, I think there are at least broadly two kinds of people. One, these are folks who are into writing and want to learn more about writing. And then the other set are educated folks who, very broadly speaking, are into understanding what human behavior or life, why do we do what we do, how to make better decisions. And when we grasp that point, we get a sense of where a book like this, Thinking Fast and Slow, has its importance, because it says to you, how are we often wrong in making decisions, but also how should we decide, how should we use rationality. And so one of the things Kahneman says very early in the beginning is that when he would talk to his colleague Amos Tversky, he says, our research was a conversation in which we invented questions and jointly examined our intuitive answers. If you think about your practice in all these shows, you ask these people who have numerous different skills and talents and pasts, you ask them questions and you explore the answers, and I wanted to ask you two things. One is, Kahneman says each question was a small experiment, and we carried out many experiments in a single day. So I want you to list for me 2 or 3 questions that you ask. That is an experiment. I would want to say that the question that I have heard you repeat to different people based on what you read in my own book, where is your Gangoli, is an experiment. It can have many different results, but it's an experiment where some things are fixed, the question is fixed, and then the answer goes in different directions because of the variation in what is being put in, right? I'd like you to tell me, and I'll come to the second part in a minute. I'd like you to tell me how you design. What are your questions? Can one think of them as experiments in social inquiry? And how do you design them? What are your questions? What are some of your principal experiments?
So, as I answer this question, just before I do a book recommendation, Michael Lewis has written this great book called The Undoing Project, which is about the collaboration between Kahneman and Tversky. And at its heart, it's a love story. And I absolutely loved it for that reason. It tells you the great affection between these two men, their changing dynamics, coming together, falling apart. To answer your question, Let me go into it in some detail. I alluded to this in the intro of a recent episode, but let me go into it in a little bit of detail, because this last evolution that I took of doing oral histories, of talking about somebody's life and doing that for 7 or 8 hours, made me think deeply about the craft, because there is nothing else like this. People have done random 7 hour episodes or 8 hour episodes and etc. etc. But no one's routinely doing these kind of large conversations. So I don't have a model to look at. Like for shorter episodes, I could look at, a whole bunch of people. If I'm doing 2 hour episodes, I can look at Russ Roberts, Sam Harris, Tyler Cowen. I can look at the art of conversation from them. For an 8 hour conversation, I don't have a guide. So over time, I arrived at this principle for myself, that when I am exploring someone's life, really, what I want to do is I want to construct it across 3 overlapping scaffoldings. Scaffolding number 1 is their life story, all the things that they have done, the chronological stuff. Scaffolding number 2 is their work. This could be the books they have written, or the papers they've written, or the films they've made, or whatever. Scaffolding number 3 is ideas and themes I want to talk about with them, some of which will emerge spontaneously in the course of the conversation. So now when I get into the conversation, I will, of course, have read everything they've written, and I'll have a long list of, I use something called Rome Research for note taking. Again, I'll link to an episode of Everything is Everything on productivity, where I've actually shown screenshots of how I research episodes and all of that. So I will have a broad sense of the area I want to cover, but I never go in there thinking ki ye order hai, ye structure hai. Like a mistake you can make when talking is ki you have 10 questions and you ask question 2. By the time the person is halfway through the answer, you've signed off. You're already on question 3. I never do that. I like to digress. I like to go in different directions, and I try to maintain a balance between these scaffoldings. Now, what I am still trying to figure out and come to terms with is that it is not necessary that the balance always has to be absolutely equal. Like for me, in terms of craft, an episode I thought of as perfect at the time I recorded it was episode 301 with Natasha Badwar, and she is an incredibly eloquent, thoughtful, wise person. But also, all of these scaffoldings came together beautifully. An episode which is incredibly popular among people, where the scaffoldings are totally not balanced, is with our good friend Nilanjana, where that particular scaffold of her private journey, her personal journey, is not there at all. We didn't spend any time talking about her years in journalism, her year writing novels. We did nothing of that. In fact, the scaffold that really dominates there is ideas and, abstract things. And it kind of worked beautifully, but when it was over, I was thinking ki, is it a failure of my craft that I didn't kind of manage to balance these 3? But later I thought about it and said, look, everybody loves the episode. It doesn't have to be an equal balance. It is useful in my mind to sort of have a sense of this and use it as a guide, but I don't have to be a stickler for it. I can let conversations flow where they are flowing. And my thumb rule for a conversation of this sort always is that it has a natural length. I never, despite people thinking that, oh, he loves to do long episodes. Actually, my average episode over the last few months has been like 3.5, 4 hours. Not more than that. But so I let everything find its length. If I'm really loving it, if my guest has the energy and they're loving it, ठीक है, फिर 8 घंटा बात करेंगे. But otherwise, if I feel after 4 hours कि okay, this is a natural moment where आज का हो गया, some other day we'll pick it up, then I kind of end it there. And
are you saying that you have never felt the need to stop at an hour and a half?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it would be stupid of me, it would be irresponsible of me to stop at a given point, because the medium is affording me the luxury to go for a deeper conversation. It would equally be irresponsible of me to force it beyond a point, कि say कि नहीं 4 घंटे किसी भी तरह करना ही है. That would also be wrong. But I think when there is a natural flow, you kind of go wherever you can with the flow. And as far as the particular questions that you ask, you're right that there are some questions that and people, like the Ganguly question, people will feel ki Amit has asked that question to so many people, he's repeating himself. But I'm doing it with a reason. I'm getting different answers every time. And I think of certain kinds of questions as unlocking questions, right?
I want those.
It is an unlocking question. Earlier I asked you in this show, what is your Kashmiri rain? That is intended as an unlocking question. I asked you, who is your Lotte Eisner? That is intended as an unlocking question. And in both those cases, you did unlock. You did kind of, talk about something that you may not have expected to sort of talk about. But I feel the important thing is that when you enter a conversation, you should never be cynical. When I enter a conversation, I think my guest knows, and you have sensed, and all my guests sense that there is total good faith that this guy is, as vulnerable as us, and he's kind of opening himself up in the same way that we are. And I think the moment they get this sense, then there is that opening up, there is that trust. And I've been really fortunate in the kind of trust that I have got, and the fact that people will actually engage with all these odd questions I might ask sometimes, and, follow them where they lead.
Yeah, I think as a guest on your show, I can also say that I'm influenced by the fact that you have been very careful in doing your research, and you're so familiar with the work that you come with good questions. But listen, the unlocking questions that you asked me, you couldn't have asked others, like Lottie Eisner or the. So I want you to give me some questions that your readers, whether your listeners recognize or not. I feel I should have a special insight into your method. If you were to say these 2 or 3 questions I enjoyed asking, let's say both Natasha and Nilanjana, so that the consistency reveals what your interest has been. 2-3 सवाल ऐसे कुछ बताओ ना.
So I've asked a lot of people, to the point it's become a cliche and I've stopped doing it, about thick and thin desires.
Acha, what is that? फिर से बोलो.
Okay,
You haven't
cool.
asked.
So I beg forgiveness of all the listeners who heard this like 40 times before from me. But so Luke Burgess has written this great book called Wanting. He's done an episode with me as well. And he is a student of the great mid-20th century philosopher René Girard. And René Girard, and you might be able to relate to this, he's a philosopher, but he was once asked to teach a literature course, I think of European literature. And he was very young then, पैसे चाहिए थे. So he said कि ठीक है कर देते हैं. And he put together a reading list and read the reading list. And then he realized when he read the reading list that all the characters and all the novels that he read, they all wanted whatever they wanted it because somebody else wanted it. And he came up with the concept of mimetic desire here, where he said that most of what we want is mimetic desire. We want it because others do. And I forget whether Burgess came up with the frame of thick and thin desires, or it goes back to Girard. But the idea is that thin desires are mimetic desires of this sort, and they can be deep, very intense. Thin doesn't mean they're not intense. So, for example, I might want the latest Mercedes, right? And I might think I really want that Mercedes, but actually it is a mimetic desire because I want that status in society or whatever. Or I might a lot of young people will grow up thinking that, the natural, I want to get married, have kids, etc., etc. But have they really thought deeply about whether that is what they really want to do, or it is just a mimetic desire, a conventional thing that they have adopted, even in the context of a writer? And I remember discussing this with Nilanjana, that if you're a writer, you can want to be a writer for the thin desire of getting acclaim, winning the Booker Prize, etc., etc. Or thick desires are something that are innate to you. And for a writer, like for you, it would be the thick desire of storytelling. It would be the thick desire of writing down the world. And so I ask people to reflect on this and think about what their thin and thick desires are. And I've kind of found that useful. So that is a cliched question that sometimes comes up.
Great example, though. Very good example. Okay.
Because
what else?
Everybody thinks about it differently. But the point I want to make is that it is not always about particular questions. It is about the unlocking, but the unlocking doesn't have to happen through a particular question, but it can happen by building a vibe where a person is sinking into themselves. And this is why I have the rule that I never interrupt. Because the problem is, whenever someone is going deep and you interrupt, they stay at a really shallow level. They cannot get deep because you're interrupting. For example, I did a great episode with Mrinal Pandeyji, and which you referred to in our last episode. You said you enjoyed that. And when I asked my first question, which was about her childhood, for 1 hour, 5 minutes, she spoke uninterrupted and took us from the 50s to the 60s to the end of the 70s, right? And it was magical. It was glorious. And I made sure I did not say a word. And I can think of other people जो 2 minute बाद बोलते हैं, लेकिन मृणाल जी इसके बारे में बताइए, और etc. And you're completely screwing it up if you do that. You have to let them go deep. And sometimes a way to let them go deep is that you don't talk about whatever book they've written or the subject of their expertise, because they will have their sound bites in their head and it'll be automatic. Take them to a place they've never been before. Like, I remember this was very unexpected for me. In between the first and second wave, I did a couple of episodes in the studio, video, and one of them was with Tamal Bandopadhyay, and Tamal had written a book on banking. Now, you might think relatively boring subject. It's a decent book, but I thought ki, before I start talking about the book, I just casually, to loosen him up, I asked him, what have been your experiences with COVID? And then he started talking, and then he said ki, I live in Bandra, and I went for a walk the other day, and these kids who used to sell things were begging now, and one man with a crazed look in his eyes helped me by the wrist, and he took me into a gully, and I was scared, but he said, Bhaiya, Bhaiya, don't worry. And there was a biryani stall, and he said, I don't want money from you, I just want to eat something, please buy me some food. And Tamal is not carrying his card, but he tells, or any cash, he tells this person, you know who I am, I walk here every day, please give this man a biryani, I will pay you later. And Tamal teared up as he said this, and I teared up, and it was this moment. And then what happens is, and it's important to build this window inside a person's soul, as it were, because then everything about them opens up. Then you realize that later when Tamal says that he's been a business journalist since the mid 1990s, when I meet an RBI governor, when I meet a chief economist of some place, I ask them questions like a complete layperson would. And I understand this vibe of his. I understand where he's coming from, because I have had this glimpse into this empathetic, warm person. And therefore, I get that his journalism is an extension of that. That he doesn't want to ask fancy questions to impress the person he's with, but he wants to ask questions so that common people will understand. And this is just one example, but that's always the effort to sort of talk in a way that breaks those filters down, so you're no longer thinking kya bole kya na bole, but you're just yourself.
I feel now bad that I interrupted you a couple of times.
No, please. It's cool. It's cool.
So your questions are small experiments, but they need not be the same for everyone, and you change them, and you also have a great commitment to not interrupting the experiment, and paying a great respect to it's not the researcher, but the researched who has great autonomy here. All right, okay, Tika. Now, I think it would be useful for people to know, and I'm going to use the Kahneman text as an example. He explains, and I use this in my last novel, he explains that if you're doing a test and you have a word which has some letters missing, let's say it starts with S and ends with P, if the person is hungry, they might say soup. If their hands are dirty, they might say soap. And he talks there about how in these experiments, the priming, how you prime the audience, determines the outcome. I wonder in what way, intelligently, critically, for a certain critical result, not to manipulate, but just if you have given thought to it, how do you think you encourage your listeners to think about certain things because you have primed them in certain ways? Your introduction, I would argue, is a way of priming, right? You said about your introductions are individualized. They are about the particular person. But there are various things you say during the talk itself. The reason I'm asking you this question is not so much to say, oh, let's understand priming, but instead to understand what your goal, let's try to get a better understanding. Because Kahneman also says most of our intuitions are biased. We are wrong, We straight away, our mind, the fast thinking takes us somewhere because we want to be decisive, but we often make the wrong decision. It is, or even the rational thinking that we do is actually, we feel we are in control, but we arrive at the wrong things. And he says even statisticians are not good intuitive statisticians. So I'm trying to get to the point about saying, for listeners who want to self-improve or listening for Gyan, that how to be more critical also. So first, let's talk about priming. Do you feel that you prime them or want to prime them in a particular way?
I don't think about it like that. So what happens is that my intro, which I record, is really in two parts. There is a part before the packaging, which is my general musing aloud on something thematic, which might is connected to the episode, but is not directly about the guest. And then after the packaging, I will talk about the guest. Introduce. I'll say, "Welcome to the Scene and the Unseen. My guest today is so and so," and give a reasonable idea of what we kind of spoke about and go in there. Now, my approach to this is this, and why I feel priming is not the right word is that I often talk about how this is the most intimate medium of all, podcasting. And now, why is that? Let's, as a metaphor, look at the audiovisual arts first. Somebody is going to see a movie in a theater. There is a certain distance between them and the big screen, and there is a similar distance between the camera and the actors. So you have your great westerns and your car chases and all that. Make it a little more sort of compressed, and you have a television set which is a couple of meters away from you, and you have a similar distance between the camera and the actors, so you'll have your sitcoms like Friends and Seinfeld and all of that. Then you have YouTube, which is a laptop in front of you, or it's on your mobile phone, and it is really close. And a lot of made for YouTube content is also like that. It's really close. It's a close up. In audio, the reason podcasting is different from radio, it's not just radio on demand, it's not a Netflix for radio. The reason it is different is that radio goes wider, and especially in markets like India where the license fees are so high, radio stations have no option but to go for the lowest common denominator. They are broadcasting. There is a reason for that word. So the situation I'd use for someone in a radio is 5 people are in a car, the radio is for them. So the announcer will declaim and he will say, jaise aap jante hain. There's a certain artifice in that as well. Podcasting is a voice in your head. It is the most intimate thing there is. Like, I remember my finest, the finest compliment I've received, and it speaks to a truth about the show and about podcasting, is after my episode with Abhinandan Sekri, someone wrote in saying that I felt so much that I'm sitting with two friends and talking to them in my living room that at one point I interrupted. And I fucking love that. That is the whole game. So the thing is that when what you are doing is premised on an intimate conversation, that where you and the person you are speaking to do not have a filter, you're talking to each other like friends, you have a similar relationship with the listener. So in that sense, you could say I've kind of been naked on my show. There is no artifice. The listener knows, a regular listener of the show knows me pretty well. Right? And they know me pretty well in a nice sort of, this person is part of my family or a close friend kind of way, not a creepy, stalkery kind of way. And therefore, the funda of priming doesn't arise. I am not trying to manipulate you. I'm not trying to take you in a particular direction. The premise of the show is that I will follow my interests, and that's a journey I'm on, and you're welcome to join me on this journey, and you might find some of it interesting, and that's the way it works. So I have to firstly be authentic to myself, and then I present it to the reader. It is what it is. I can't prime it one way because I don't think of it like that. Maybe subconsciously I end up doing that, but I don't think of it like that. It's just a very straightforward that this is what I did, this is what I went for, and this is what you have.
Yeah. Kahneman has this metaphor of the water cooler conversation. A podcast is a water cooler conversation, except on a much bigger scale. In some ways, it is where people are discussing. Now here he says he would like to correct. He says the biases of intuition. He says, so this is my aim for water cooler conversations: improve the ability to identify and understand errors of judgment and choice in others and eventually in ourselves by providing a richer and more precise language to discuss them. I feel that, sometimes, let's say, when you ask your guests what do they feel about the kind of exchanges that happens in social media and how is it different from other forms, etc., you're trying to have us question the level of discourse and in many ways to improve it. I feel it is. And so in some ways you're performing a public service, whether you like it or not, about how to be better citizens, how to have a truer society, how to have democracy. Or at least that's the spirit in which I have received it. So that's why I'm pressuring you in some ways on these points, in order to say, if you are sitting down at some family dinner, you will have some uncle say something that is just received truth, in no way submitted to the kind of logic or statistical scrutiny that Kahneman wants to do. And therefore, you are having an intelligent discussion in order to counter the kind of systematic or systemic biases that people have and they proffer at a dinner table. And that we should always try in these conversations to, in some ways, interrupt unexamined thought. And that's what you're doing. I mean, I feel when you ask people these questions. I wanted to ask you one crucial question, which was, when people listen to TED Talks, those are very, very short, and they offer a quick fix on something. And, I have often clicked on a few. Let's say there's something about public speaking or more efficient teaching or prejudice in blah, blah, blah. I click on it thinking I will learn something. And I sometimes have. Sometimes I have been skeptical. Yours is a TED Talk with chai, or, it's really not a TED Talk because it's so long to begin with. I would like you to just say something about how do you think of this as either sharing something but also being different from a TED Talk?
I'll respond to three aspects of this. One aspect is that what it might have in common with a water cooler conversation is the informality of language and the lack of self-consciousness. But where it is different is that it is directed conversation. Like some of my oral histories, I think of them as assisted autobiographies, for example. And one of the things I've realized in conversations I've done with old friends, is that I might have known the person for 20 years, but then I'll do an episode with them and I'll be like, wow, I did not know the first thing about them. I have felt this with old friends I've recorded with, like Chandrahas Chaudhary, Deepak Shenoy, etc., etc. I mean, you and I are also, in a manner of speaking, we've known each other for a long time, but we never hung out much physically, so that feeling isn't there. We, in any case, didn't know much about each other, but with people I've hung out with a heck of a lot, like Chandrahas and Deepak and all of that, you just get to learn so much, because in a water cooler conversation, you're not going to ask someone about their notion of home. You're not going to say, tell me about your mother. You're not going to say,
yes,
what makes you cry at night, etc., etc. Whereas in a conversation of this sort, you can. So that's part one. Part two, as far as the discourse is concerned, it might seem ambitious and grandiose to say it, but yes, I will say it. I do want to make a difference to the discourse. Our discourse is very shallow, very polarized, and I feel that by leaving a repository of such conversations out there, I feel it makes a difference. It shows you that a different kind of conversation is possible, that a different kind of conversation is desirable, that none of the people I am speaking to are the social media stereotypes they are often made out to be. They're people with deep depth. Like Ram Guha, for example, I've done 5 episodes with him, right? He's a wonderful human being, deeply generous, but both the right and the left have stereotyped him in different ways on social media. For me, the highlight of these 5 conversations is when he spoke about how he will often lie down in his bedroom and he will listen to Hindustani classical music, and then it will get dark, and sometimes his wife will come home from work and open the bedroom to find he's lying in the dark and he's lost track of time and he's listening to music. And to be able to have him share a moment like that, and then to have that music linked in the show notes so people can listen to it for themselves and be moved by it, I think that's a beautiful moment of human connection that is there, because ultimately we are all part of the same freaking community. Ultimately we all have a stake in this nation, no matter where you come from. So having this sense of dialogue is important. And the third thing I would say is that, look, a TED Talk is a snapshot. It is a snapshot of a view by a person. Whereas I think of even an 8-hour conversation of mine as not being one thing, but it is part of a larger conversation that multiple people are taking part in. So for example, the theme of a relatively liberal constitution and the extremely illiberal society that has been imposed on, and how politics has caught up with society today, that has been a larger conversation across maybe 30-40 guests who've written books on this, who've thought about it differently. And together, when you listen to those conversations and you take in those views, and even if you have not, remembered everything those people may have said, somewhere by osmosis, you now have a larger sense of the issue. Like I have done multiple episodes on our economic reforms. In 1991, I've done episodes with Montek Singh Ahluwalia and KP Krishnan. I've done an episode on Narasimha Rao with Vinay Sitapati. And recently, episode 28 of my YouTube show, Everything is Everything. It's a show I co host with Ajay Shah. We speak about the reformers. And I loved the episode so much because I felt that Ajay's 30 years of experience in this field and my 50, 60 conversations on this subject were so beautifully distilled, and it came together in one story that we tell over 1 hour. And there is no way that this would exist if I hadn't put in that work, if I hadn't put in those, hundreds of hours of conversation. So I think that there is a larger conversation across many subjects. There is a larger discourse out there. Whereas a TED Talk is one random shallow sort of snapshot. It can be a great snapshot, but it is not this tapestry of conversation that that is so rich. And at least for me, so I do this with a sense of purpose. This was not, I'd never had an ambition to be a podcaster or to do something like this. But now that I'm doing it, like, A, I do like doing it, I'm proud of it. B, I think I'm pretty good at it. But what really drives me to do it is a sense of purpose, that I feel I'm building something bigger than myself. And, that's what keeps me going.
Can you be, in the same way as you ask your guests to explain how they are good at it in different ways, you'll say, I want you to unlock a little bit of your secret. What do you think you're doing right? What makes you such a successful podcaster? So many people are listening to you. What works, you think? What are you doing? Don't just say, well, because it is deep dive, but instead, what are some things that make you an attractive podcaster?
Thank you for calling me attractive. So I'll think aloud about this. Like, number one, I think there's a lot of luck, and I'm not being unnecessarily modest, but I also produce this great podcast called Brave New World at bravenewpodcast.com for a friend of mine called Vasant Dhar. He is an AI professor in his 60s in New York at Stern University. And the kind of guests he's had on his show are mind-blowing. He's had Daniel Kahneman on his show, for example. He's had Scott Galloway, Eric Topol, just a bunch of big names. You think of the big names are there. And very good conversations, 1.5 hours. The show just has never taken off. I know the numbers, I'm not going to talk about it, just simply never took off. And I've seen so many other shows which will have, like, it doesn't matter how long you do it, they just don't take off. So firstly, I don't know how this happened, but it just took off like this and became what it is. And the second part of it is that I can't talk about why people like it. That is for people to talk about. But I'll talk about what I think my credos are. And credo number one is you have to be authentic to yourself. And this show is always my journey. I ask you questions I want to ask you. I go down by lanes I want to go down. It's driven by my genuine curiosity, right? Nothing else. I will never ask a question I don't really care about, and I will never have a guest on the show who I don't really want to speak to. You would be amazed if I told you some of the people I've actually turned down for the show. But the point is, if I don't have that feeling, I don't have that vibe, I just don't want to do it. So, one, I have to be authentic to myself, and therefore that authenticity, or whether you call it good faith or whatever, is something that I think comes across to listeners. Secondly, I always give the guest that respect. That, there's this great quote by Stephen Covey: you have to listen not to respond, but to understand. And what that means is that, most of us listen because we are listening with our ego. We want to butt in and say the next smart thing that comes into our head. And when you do the longer format, you're forced into a mode where you're listening to understand. You really want to know the other person. You're not being judgmental of them. I have disagreed with pretty much every guest I've ever had on the show on some small thing or the other. And that's great. And I've disagreed a lot with some guests. And that is great, because the point is you're connecting as human beings. The disagreements are not tackled here like they are tackled on Twitter or somewhere else. They're tackled respectfully. The other person will say what they say. I will never interrupt. So often after the person finishes a long answer, I will say something like, okay, I have 3 observations and the third one leads to a question. And that's because, I have this notepad, which I am now showing you, but alas, the reader cannot see it, where I'm constantly noting down whatever thoughts come. And the other part about, as far as research is concerned, is that, look, you do a deeper conversation, you can't, like, I have, for some of my guests, just as an exercise, I put a question in ChatGPT. I'm speaking to so-and-so today, give me 20 questions to ask him. And the questions you get are actually adequate for a 1-hour show, but they are completely useless to me. because they're completely surface level. So today, if I'm doing a life in times, I have to read everything you've written. I have to really understand your field well, and I have to let my curiosity take over and take me down rabbit holes while I sort of research you. I do all my research and Rome research. Now I have a superpower that contains a feature and a bug, which is that I can absorb a lot of knowledge really fast. What other people would take 10 hours to do, I can do in 1 hour. I have to read 3 books in one day. I will read them all without skimming. I will read them deeply. The bug is that within a week, I've forgotten everything. So it is almost like a short term thing. So what happens is I am putting in the like 20-30 hours before an episode. I'm not really sleeping much. I'm reading everything. I'm taking the notes in my Rome research. Then I have the episode is done, and then I unwind. I forget everything. I don't remember everything. So during an episode it might seem ki arey aise he's just quoting from thin air and he's referencing this and he's referencing that, but a lot of it is simply notes that I have taken, and I am meticulous about my notes. I am the best note taker in South Asia, but that also brings with it the bug that my memory is staggeringly poor. And when I think of what happened to my dad and your dad and other dads and what age does to us, sometimes I worry that fuck, it's all gonna go away. So do the good work while you can.
Yeah. I have a couple of more pressing questions, and then I will shut up. So
Okay.
please. One is that, I don't know whether we have discussed this, but in my book, A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, I talk a little bit about the night before I went to interview this Indian man who was the first arrest or first convicted felon, I can't remember, under the Patriot Act. He had tried to sell a missile, an Igla missile, to the FBI. His name was Hemant Lekhani. I had tried to interest him in a conversation. So as an interviewer, you try to, what you were calling a moment ago, unlocking question, a question to unlock. I had sent him an article on psychology, but he was not interested. So I took down from my bookshelf Among the Believers by V.S. Naipaul because I was interested in the questions. There was a passage he had about his conversation with Ayatollah Khalkhali, the hanging judge of Khomeini. So he says that on a sheet of hotel paper that he had brought him with him, he wrote, "Where were you born? What made you decide to take up religious studies? What did your father do? Where did you study? Where did you first preach? How did you become an Ayatollah? What was your happiest day?"
There's one beautiful question I remember at the time I asked it, and it came in the moment. It wasn't planned. It came in the moment. This is where Gaurav will have to edit an awkward silence out because I first have to kind of find it. I can't remember it. So at the time, I remember telling my writing group that it's the best question I've ever asked.
All right, then let's be patient and try to find it.
Let me kind of find it. But it's contextual. It is not a good.
हाँ मैं समझ रहा हूँ फिर भी who knows.
Yeah.
कौन बनेगा करोड़पति में you get to call someone. Wouldn't one of the students know?
There's 700 people in this group. Somebody or the other will remember. So let's
क्या
see.
बात है.
कोई ना कोई तो बता ही देगा. Let's see. See, this is what I mean by memory.
The reason I'm gungunawing this song is that you mentioned COVID memories, and there was that great memory of, there was a report of the Bengali doctor. I think he's a doctor, yeah. His name was Soham Chatterjee. He sang that song for his mother. He could not visit her when she was dying. He sang it because they had a love for music. तेरा मुझसे है पहले ना ना कोई la da 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 da. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was chatting with Eric Weinstein, and there was a moment towards the end where we went into personal story territory, and at this precise moment, a question strikes me, which out of context is just a normal question, but the question was, what did you need when you needed something the most? Or what did you need when you most needed something? I forget exactly, but it was an unlocking question. His eyes misted over, and it absolutely unlocked him, and it was a great moment. And often, so what happens is that you don't pre-plan this, but during the conversation, something strikes you, some moment of connection, and you can kind of get in there and talk about it. Like in my episode with Ranjit, for example, I just randomly at one point asked him, "Look, without any context, what do you miss?" And our conversation had kind of reached that flow and reached that point where he actually answered this. Otherwise, in a water cooler, it's like a bizarrely abrupt kind of question. So I think you have to learn to kind of get in the flow and just go where it takes you, and where it takes you is where it takes you.
That makes sense. I've come now to my final question. You will remember that earlier in our discussion today, I mentioned in passing Haruki Murakami. He had been away from his country. He had been in the US when there was an attack in the Tokyo subway. And he went back to the country to conduct a series of interviews because he felt he needed to participate in some ways in the national life. You and I have also talked today and earlier about the changes that have overcome our society, in the Indian society, in the last few years. So I want you to help me out as a ninja of such conversations, that if I want to enter into that discussion, if I want to enter that national life, what would be the questions I should ask to advance that conversation?
Ask who?
The people I meet in India.
Are you meeting intellectuals? Are you meeting common people? How does it?
All kinds of people. I would like to.
And are these?
I mean, how to do the Murakami kind of thing?
And would these questions be meant purely as unlocking questions, or would these also meant to be questions that would be heard by others and would be content on its own?
I would have my phone out. I would ask the question. I'd listen to the responses while recording them and taking notes, and then I would shape them into a narrative.
See, here's a realization I've had, and it's a very depressing realization over the last couple of years, which is that the way we discover information and we discover the media is very different from what it was when you and I were young. Let's say a 15-year-old today, somebody forwards him a video which is toxic in whatever way it is toxic. And that is the first YouTube video he's ever seen. At that point, the algorithm kicks in and it will recommend more videos of exactly that kind. And eventually it will create from him an echo chamber in which his world is one particular kind of world with one particular set of narratives and one particular history. And somebody else, his next door neighbor, the same algorithm could take that person into a separate world of their own, where there is nothing in common between these two people. I did an episode with Akash Singh Rathore and I was expressing exactly these thoughts, and he came up with this pithy phrase about how when often two young people meet each other is two algorithms meeting each other. And I think that from a distance, you and I don't see this. From a distance, you and I have grown up at a time where there was a broad consensus on truth and there are certain commonalities we take for granted. And we think that, okay, both of us have that shared bedrock of understanding the world. And therefore, everybody has a shared bedrock. And the point is, no, boss. The common truths are gone. You could be talking to someone who looks at the world completely differently from you and finds you utterly bizarre and even evil. It might be rational for that person to see you as evil. So then I think part of what we need to do as storytellers is unlock these different worlds, get a sense of where they are going, get a sense of what is happening in those ecosystems. Like, You referred to Kunal Purohit's book on H-pop. I haven't heard it either. I haven't read it either. I'm waiting to read it. But I think there needs to be more work like that, and those are the kind of stories I want to hear. And the thing is, it's very easy. And I'll ask you this also. I'll turn this back around on you since this was your last question, so I'm allowed to ask you a few questions. Is that, as a writer, as a journalist, as someone with the phone out and asking questions, it's very easy to look down on the other person, that they are the subject and you are asking, and oh, they're so ignorant, and oh, they don't know this, or oh, they don't know that. How do you get past that trap? Because ultimately, there, but for the grace of the flying spaghetti monster go you. We are very lucky we grew up as we did. We had the LLMs that we did, in a sense. A lot of people aren't, and everybody is, everybody's different, and at the same time everybody's the same. It's a human condition. So how do you how do you deal with that? How do you make those connections when you're out on the road talking to people?
By the way, what is LLM?
LLM is large learning model. So all of these AIs,
ये सब terms कहाँ से तुम? Where did you pick these up, boss?
करना पड़ता है सर जी. So
अच्छा. ठीक है. After the riots in Bombay, no, it was after. Let me see. Yeah, after the riots, after the 1993 riots, the Bombay police had picked up this family near the Konkan border, and they had tortured them for days. A Muslim family, the Haspatels, and they believed that these people had RDX, as they had propellers, rocket propellers. It turned out that actually it was just, there was an accident of a truck, and it was a textile products were being taken, and these were actually they resembled projectiles, but they were
spindles
for textile weaving.
Mm.
Spindles, yeah. So they beat them up on this suspicion because they were Muslims. When I was interviewing these people, the guy who was most articulate or expressive, he took me aside and he said, the Americans, what they are doing right now in Abu Ghraib, they learnt it from Bombay police.
Wow.
Okay? Now, I could be condescending and think, what a stupid man. But actually, all I needed to understand was how he was trying to connect what had happened in his world, in his life, to something that had received attention and had not been ignored by the media, that had been condemned the world over, that had been seen as an instance of brutality and torture. And so, trying to, when you said earlier that how you find effective this notion of trying to listen, not to respond, but in order to understand, here, what was important for me was to understand that this man was placing himself on the global stage. He was saying, I too have a place in the world, and I cannot be dismissed. And what happened to us should not be ignored. I mean, so in a way, that was the most eloquent plea that he could have made. And that's how I saw it. So that's, I think, the attempt I'm trying to make as a listener or as a journalist or as a writer, to understand what is not just the situation, but what actually is the story.
So I'll ask you a question here. You mentioned Abu Ghraib, you mentioned what the Mumbai police did to these people, and one is reminded of Hannah Arendt's phrase, banality of evil. And the thing is, we think of the Nazis as particularly evil, but the point is that common people everywhere, at all times, in these times, around us, in our cities, in our neighborhoods, perhaps even in our homes, behave in the most terrifyingly evil ways. And this is commonplace, and this is recurring. And I also think simultaneously of what I consider to be the human project of culture. Like, we are the only species that can reprogram ourselves, that can mitigate our own hardwiring. We have instincts that we would consider bad. We have instincts that we would consider good. And I think the whole enlightenment project, the whole project of culture, is that we mitigate the worst demons of our natures, the tribalistic sort of instincts that we have, and we amplify the better angels of our nature, as Steven Pinker eloquently put it. But what is increasingly happening is that human nature nature is a fixed thing. And whereas this project, this cultural project, this project of sort of civilization is something that requires eternal vigilance, renewed commitment. You have to keep working at it, which is why generation after fucking generation, we do not learn. We have the same shit happening. You know, what happened in Abu Ghraib, that happened in Mumbai, that will happen for the rest of human history all over the world, in every city, in every town. What are your thoughts on that?
I would think that someone like Kahneman, whom we have been talking about now and then, would want us to be a little bit more skeptical of saying that human nature is unchanging, or to resist broad generalizations. And as a writer, I'm particularly interested in the exceptions, in the divergence from, the moment of, when people talk about, let's say, the murderer at the moment that he is about to plunge the knife, the moment of hesitation, or, people turning otherwise. But you're right. Not only is there the talk of, not only do I admire and accept the term that Arendt used about the banality of evil, I actually like whoever it was who coined the term banality of the banality of evil. That's how ordinary it has become.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the terrible, let's say, if you think of the killers of Naroda Patia, now under the present dispensation allowed to go free, and them being garlanded, so that is banality of the banality of evil, and at the same time also to, I don't know why, was one thing is to be skeptical. So even when we talk about the Enlightenment, how to say that as a part of the Enlightenment project, though, as a part of the emergence of rational discourse or this or that, was also the idea of civilizing discourse and the attempt to go out and colonize people and thereby introduce civilization to them, which was the most damning thing they could have done. It was actually the destruction of the civilizations that were present, let's say, in Africa or Asia. So our attempt should be, I feel, except I am always reluctant to give gyan on such a large scale, is to be skeptical of any claims to righteousness and to stress otherwise, to be enormously not cynical, but just questioning, to question, for example, the state's discourse on development and what is being done with irrigation, with our mountains, with our rivers, with all our natural resources. And also, on the other hand, I'm very attentive because, the blue book came out, then the yellow book, and if you mix blue and yellow, you get green. So I'm now very attentive as I work on my next project to think about the resources of hope, really. So one of the people I wrote about in a piece called, I think it was called Particulate Matter for Granta, was my conversation with a guy who has been saying all across Rajasthan that your family should have a green family member. You have, you plant a tree and you think of that as a family member and you take care of it. And he has succeeded, some claim. The UN has given him an award in turning the desert green, And he told me, I have yet to verify it, he told me that he has been able to plant bare without using a single drop of water. And I'm very curious about that. All these efforts, all across the country, I'm to be very alert, to have your ear down to the ground to see where is resistance. Last month I met Natasha Narwal in Delhi, and I found that very inspiring. They kept her in prison. They did not let her come out when her father was sick with COVID and dying. They let her out only to light his funeral pyre. But now, unable to pursue or feeling a disconnect with what she had originally enrolled in her PhD, she has now started doing her studies in carceral studies, so that even that which came as the worst thing done to her is now leading to something positive. And I feel That's great. I want to be able to record those things.
What is carceral studies? Sorry.
Studies of prisons.
Oh, okay. Acha, incarceration. Yeah, yeah.
Incarceration से उसका connection है.
So, as we are reaching the end of our allotted time, as it were, you're reaching the end of your allotted time. You have 3 seconds, buzzer will ring, answer the question. But we have like about 10 minutes or so. So, you of course have to promise to come here again because I had so much to talk about. And
It's an honor, boss. It's an honor.
Okay.
I mean, oh my God.
Okay. So I'm going to throw that earlier question back at you, which you refused to answer then. Gateway books. What are your great gateway books? Like I spoke of Pinker's Blank Slate and, I could speak of others, but what are your gateway books, which served as a rabbit hole for you into a world of knowledge and curiosity?
I think Ways of Seeing, which I have mentioned by Jeff Dyer, by John Berger, was a great example. Jeff Dyer actually then wrote about Berger later on, so that's why. And then John Berger's book, A Seventh Man, which was about when he got his Booker for G, his novel, which when I first read, I did not entirely understand. He used half of the money to give to, I think it was Caribbean workers, because Booker's wealth had come from colonies in the Caribbean. So he gave it to workers who were trying to organize. And the other half he used to research and write a book called Seventh Man, which was about immigrants in Europe. And the way it mixes, prose and poetry and images, that has been a very important book for me. Then, our early discoveries in terms of George Orwell or even our Indian writers, Kushwant Singh or Ved Mehta when I was a young man, allowed me to observe our setting, our immediate setting, and write. Later, in more recent years, like let's say 20 years, 30 years, people like J.M. Coetzee, his book Waiting for Barbarians or Disgraced, or Elizabeth Costello are great models of how to write novels while addressing power and important questions. More recently, I've been reading Penelope Fitzgerald because there is a lightness of touch there that I really appreciate. You'll find that also in someone like Naipaul's House for Mr. Biswas has that sense of the comic, even amidst the tragic. It's just something I really, really like and want to aspire to. That's it. I mean, there's so many books. Recently, just 2-3 days ago, at the Cullman Fellowship, where I'm at the New York Public Library, someone said we should do a reading group. People don't read Philip Roth that much, but this person said Sabbath's theater is such an outpouring that we should do a reading group. And Philip Roth has been important for me because of a certain frankness, a certain sticking to a particular identity and trying to articulate a life. And I've been thinking that I'll read Sabbath's Theater. Maybe that will be another of those books that you have been asking me about. I should also mention, without forgetting, that when I was an utterly aimless young man who wanted to be a writer but did not know how, reading V.S. Naipaul's autobiography, which I took down from a friend of mine, had it in his room, and I was sleeping on his floor because I didn't have a room myself at Delhi University at that time. It was Finding the Center. His autobiography there about how he wrote his first book was very important. It just gave me a sense of what it means to be a writer. And my God, it was beautiful.
My penultimate question, And for this, I'll quote a passage from A Matter of Rats, where I think in the introduction you wrote, quote, "Here is a case that was a favorite of mine for several years. A journalist, Arvind Das, wrote in the Republic of Bihar about a conversation overheard in a train from Patna in 1991. A woman, distraught at her husband's prolonged illness, was telling her son that she sometimes found herself wanting to commit suicide. The son responded that his father's death would be more welcome. Das had written, 'Why should you die? Why not kill Babuji instead? If he goes away, we will get his gratuity and Provident Fund money, and it is possible that I might even get a job on compassionate grounds. What use will your dying be?' And this boy was only 12 years old. So it's a great memorable passage.
Oh my God.
And I'm also reminded of this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, where he says, 'Every man alone is sincere. At the entrance of a second person, hypocrisy begins. A friend, therefore, is a sort of paradox in nature.' Stop quote. And what both of these kind of hint at is how people are instrumental to us. And we might put a veneer on this, and we might, exalt relationships like fatherhood and friendship and all that, but people are ultimately instrumental to us. And one of the ways in which we try to fight our hardwiring, one of the good things about culture and civilization is that we want to rise above this. We don't want people to be instrumental with us, and therefore, late in life, I have also come to think that one has to be intentional about relationships, if nothing else, about how we treat the people around us, about how we nurture our friendships, and so on and so forth. So I want to ask you to sort of ponder about that, to share your thoughts on that, because earlier you had also said that, you'd referred to Iris Murdoch saying that there are 13 people you need, and at a closer level, I heard someone once say that there should be 5 people in the world to whom you can say anything, to whom you can bear your heart out. So how do you think of relationships and friendships, and what is the kind of intentionality you bring into the way you relate with people?
Boss, I only bear my heart to you because you asked those unlocking questions. That's your skill. Acha, to go back, I had totally forgotten that quote that you read out from Arvind Das, who was a model of mine when I was in college because he was a journalist from Bihar and would write great pieces in TOI. But what it recalled to me was another story, also from Bihar, which I want to provide as an antidote. And I must have listed that because I had gone out for a walk during that trip with Ashish Nandi and Humayun Tomb. And he said, as I was going to Bihar the next day or the day after, he reminded me that one of the things that Arvind Das probably had told him and wanted him to remember was that in Bihar, desperate parents sometimes would take a gun and would be on the train, and they would catch hold. They would see a young man, ask the caste maybe, ask him at gunpoint to get down from the train and marry their daughter. And Ashish Nandi wanted me to consider the simple point that maybe it was Arvind Das who had communicated to him that none of these marriages in Bihar had ended up in the violence of what we saw elsewhere in India, certainly in Punjab, in Delhi, of bride burnings. He said those marriages had worked. And he wanted me to always carry this thought of that society, of that tenderness in mind when I wrote. In other words, so it's not always instrumental. How is it that cultural or other factors save us from depravity or inhumanity?
Sergi, I asked a question about you, but so, how do you look at the issue of relationships?
Yeah. I always think that I would like to think of it, of our interactions as collaborations, so that I bring with an open heart something to you and should feel free to demand something from you. I was always a little bit struck when a friend of mine, when I was younger, he was a communist and was from a poor family, asked my mother, he said, "Ma, ये आपकी टेप रिकॉर्डर बड़ी अच्छी लग रही है मुझे, मैं ले जाऊं?" And my mother must have been very inclined to give it away. even though that was the first thing, luxury item that she herself had got for herself. And I was distraught at this boy demanding it, but at the same time, I kind of admired. I would not have dared to ask a friend's mother even for food if I was hungry. I would have felt inhibited. And I thought, I kind of liked this guy's honesty in asking for what he wanted. So I don't know. I still feel uncomfortable about that. But with friends, I always feel that if we left aside all those other things and thought of ourselves as creatives, communal, by which I mean social subjects, then we would be very much open to what have we brought and what we asked of others, and thereby we would produce, as if we were participating in a potluck, we would produce a wonderful feast. So it was in that spirit that I wanted to be open with the questions which I expected you to ask me, and you did ask me. And I wanted to prepare for you by also doing a little bit of reading, which I thought, because I was caught by the description of your podcast, which I had not noticed before, about the behavior science. And so I thought I should read Kahneman's. So that's what I read yesterday. And I had questions for you, which I thought I would remember and maybe think more about, not only to better answer you, but actually to be a better questioner and a better listener myself when I conducted my interviews. So welcome to the feast, baby.
No. Thank you for your kindness in asking the questions you did and for the attention. A final question, and it's more of a request that, when we were discussing recording today, you had said that I will read out things in Hindi and all of that. And I know for a fact that many of my listeners love that. I love that because the swad of your reading out Hindi work is wonderful. So please read out things that you love to end this show.
Kya baat hai. You have such a good memory. You complain about dementia, but oh my God. Acha. I will read two. One, because you were right to remind me that somebody had said 5 people rather than having 14 friends. So in that, I will read a poem that I first wrote in Hindi. It's called Homeopathy. Or as in Hindi, it would be pronounced homeopathy. प्रिय दोस्तों की लिस्ट छोटी होनी चाहिए, शायद 1 दर्जन। दुश्मनों की और छोटी, लेकिन होनी चाहिए जरूर। डायरी के किसी पन्ने के कोने में कहीं दर्ज वो नाम जिनसे नफरत की बू आती हो। अब आज याद आ रहे हैं डॉक्टर भट्टाचार्य, पटना के पटेल नगर में बैठते थे। कल्पना कीजिए दिनेश ठाकुर की, उनसे 30 साल और बूढ़े, एक कंधे पर रखी शॉल, होम्योपैथी की दवा देने से पहले बताते थे उन सारे खाद्य पदार्थों के नाम जिनका परहेज करना आवश्यक है। I'll now read the English translation.
Lovely.
Homeopathy. A list of your dear friends ought to be short, perhaps a dozen, and the list of enemies even shorter, but it should be there for sure, written in some corner of a page in a diary, all those names that give off an odor of hate. Today I am remembering Dr. Bhattacharya, who had a clinic in Patel Nagar in Patna. Imagine someone who looked like Dinesh Thakur, about 30 years older, a shawl on one shoulder, who before giving homeopathic medicine always provided a list of all those items of food and drink it was essential to avoid.
Beautiful, and I should tell my listeners at this point that the Dinesh Thakur you're referring to is not the health activist who's been on my show, but the actor who often played a Hindi film villain with a distinctive beard and all of that.
Yes. And also a character role.
Yeah.
I mean,
Rajnigandha.
Yes.
All right, so more?
My final poem,
Yes, sir.
if I may,
Please.
is called, in Hindi, I had titled it Sab Chhucha Hota Hai. But in English, it is translated as Rules of Writing. And I know there are many writers on your among your listeners, so I'll read that English in a bit. Here's the Hindi one first. Here's the Hindi original first. महात्मा गांधी की आत्मकथा में मौसम का कहीं जिक्र नहीं, लंदन की किसी इमारत या सड़क के बारे में कोई बयान नहीं, किसी कमरे की, कभी एकत्रित भीड़ या यातायात के किसी साधन की कहीं कोई चर्चा नहीं। यही वीएस नायपाल की आलोचना है। लेकिन मौसम तो गांधी जी के अंदर था। तूफान से जूझती एक अडिग आत्मा, नैतिकता की पतली पगडंडी पर ठोकर खाता, संभलता, रास्ता बनाता हुआ, बढ़ता हुआ इंसान। अगर आप सोच की खोज कर रहे हैं, क्या फर्क पड़ता है कि सूरज आज शाम 6:15 पे डूबा या 6:25 पे? लेकिन नायपॉल की बात सराखों पे। अगर आप महात्मा नहीं, महज लेखक हैं, आपका ध्यान देना होगा, नोट करना होगा अपने आसपास की दीवारों पर खरोचे गए प्रेमियों के नाम, छतों पर गिरती बारिश की बूंदों का अंतराल, आंधी में झूमते पेड़ों की डालों की लचीलापन, साइकिल की घंटी की आवाज या फिर दंगे के बाद का सन्नाटा। लिखना होगा कैंटीन में चुपचाप बैठी युवती के बारे में, जिसके सामने रखे पानी के गिलास में पूरी दुनिया उल्टी दिखाई देती है।
Wow.
And finally, the translation from the original Hindi. Rules of writing. Nowhere in Mahatma Gandhi's memoir does he mention the weather or describe London's streets, its houses, or even a room, the crowds. No discussion of any mode of transport. This criticism has been made by V.S. Naipaul. But the weather was inside Gandhi. A solitary spirit caught in the storm, a lone self, walking, stumbling, making his own moral way. If you are searching for the truth, how does it matter whether the sun set this evening at 6:15 or 6:25? But I do heed V.S. Naipaul. If you are not a Mahatma and merely a writer, you will have to pay attention and take note of the lovers whose names are scratched on the walls that rise around you. The interval between the drops of rain, being blown on the roof, the lithe branches of trees dancing in the wind, the ringing of a bicycle's bell, the silence after a riot. You will have to write about the young woman sitting alone in the canteen and the glass of water in front of her, in which the whole world appears upside down.
Beautiful, magnificent. मजा आ गया. Thank you so much, sir.
नहीं, थैंक यू. अच्छा रहा.
अच्छा रहा. On
अब
that,
जा रहा हूँ जरा बच्चों के लिए खाना बनाने.
on that note, आप बच्चों के लिए खाना बनाइए. I will put this episode to bed. Thank you so much, and we shall keep talking.
जिंदाबाद. Thank you, boss. Be well.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, head on over to your nearest bookstore, online or offline. Pick up the blue book, pick up the yellow book, pick up every book by him. They're all great. You can follow Amitava on Twitter at Amitava Kumar. That's one word. You can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.